All right, thanks everyone. We'll get started here. Let me just. So yeah, I decided I'm going to try to start doing some more of these late night type live streams because I think people, that work throughout the day will have a time to be able to check this out. And also, I work throughout the day, so it just makes it easier for me. So today I wanted to talk more about the coup that we see going on, and there'll be some of this that might seem like repetition, but I think that it's worth discussing because there's a lot of things that I don't really see good defenses coming from the Republicans of what's going on. So let's start with some of kind of the new things that we're seeing. There's a report coming out that Vindman's one of the people that testified. He's someone who worked, he's a decorated war hero apparently, and he's someone that originally in the closed door testimony had a problem with what was going on with what Trump said, and there's now evidence coming out that even though he testified he didn't know who the whistleblower was, there's actually evidence coming out that he may have in fact known who that whistleblower was and may have in fact coordinated some of his discussions with them. So it's going to be worth discussing when Vindman does his testimony. I think that there's going to be a lot of contention where you're going to see Republicans asking Vindman, have you had contact with this whistleblower? And you'll see Adam Schiff come out and say, oh, no, you can't ask about these questions. This is trying to out a whistleblower and that's inappropriate. So we'll see how that goes. They also listed some more people that will testify. That's included Morrison and Volker, both who basically have Trump's side of the testimony, and that's going to be on Wednesday. Then you're also going to see, I think, Thursday, Fiona Hill will testify. You also have Sondland testifying. So for those of you that are just kind of cursory paying attention to this, what this amounts to is this. The entire case for impeachment against Trump is a bunch of people saying, well, I heard that someone else heard that someone said this. And all of those people are going to be doing an interpretation of what they think was said by someone who heard Trump and what they think his motivations were. The problem is that unless they specifically were told by Trump, I'm doing this because I want dirt on Joe Biden and I hope this helps me in the 2020 election, there is no case for impeachment because they have to be able to prove that he had some kind of nefarious personal intent to be able to do this. Now, I've gone through how absurd these Democrats are and how absurd the media is because on one hand, and this is something that they'll always do, I don't know how to word this. I need to come up with a better way of wording this, but you see constantly that the media and the Democrats, what they do is they constantly try to... Oh, by the way, just real quick, I'm using a different internet connection, so let me know if there's lag or audio issues or anything. Sorry, I'll type that out there. So what the Democrats and the media will do is they constantly, anytime that someone on their side, which is kind of the establishment side, so whether that be a Democratic politician, a media member that's just a mouthpiece for them, someone in the intel agency, anytime they're accused of wrongdoing, they demand 100% proof of their wrongdoing. So, for example, Hillary Clinton, she had the private server, she had her team destroy subpoenaed emails, but none of that's good enough. They say, oh, no, you need to prove her intent 100%. You need to prove that intent or else there's nothing to this. But conversely, anytime that someone connected to Trump or Trump's orbit or the Tea Party or some non-establishment conservatives accused of doing anything, or some media person who's someone that's a competition to the establishment Democrats media. So it could be Dave Rubin or Joe Rogan or anyone. It could even be a left-wing person like a Jimmy Dore, who has no love for Trump. They always assume the worst possible motivation, so they only need 1% proof of anything being wrong for that to be enough to indict them. So I saw this in, I don't remember who wrote this, but I read it on Twitter today, where they called it the Biden standard. I think Real Clear Politics. You can check it out if you want. But they talked about the Trump standard and the Biden standard and what the difference that is. And with the Trump standard, it is if there is any smoke whatsoever, if you could find the slightest hint of any allegation to Trump or anyone connected to him, then that's media worthy. Then you talk about how devastating that would be. You talk about the guilt of that. You talk about how it's bad for the country, etc. With the Biden standard, there has to be not just smoke. You need 100% proof. Only an audio recording of Biden verified by audio experts in the DNC that was probably done live on camera so that we could all see it, of him announcing, yes, I extorted Ukraine with $1 billion tax dollars because I wanted my son left off the hook. Only that would be enough. Anything short of that, and you're a conspiracy theorist, you're hurting the country, you're biased, and if you're in the Trump administration, then you've committed some crime if you looked in to Biden or Hunter Biden or the people connected to him. That's constantly what we see. And we can see that this certainly has picked up pace under the Trump administration, how they treat Trump. But even before then, you could see it. Like, let's go back to the Benghazi hearings. Now, we can see from what's publicly available. We know certain facts. We know for a fact that Hillary Clinton, the Obama administration, blamed the Benghazi attacks on some guy that did a video that upset Muslims. We know that that wasn't the truth. Now, you could fill in the blanks from there. That's what we know. You know, there's all sorts of speculation, which I think there's a better than not case of that there was illegal weapons running going through the embassy in Libya, that it was going to rebels, aka Islamic terrorists, that this was suppressed because they thought it would hurt them in the, 2014 elections, etc. But you don't need to know any of that. You don't even have to believe any of that. All you need to know is we were told this story, an ambassador and many great Americans died. We were told this story by the Obama administration, and that story was a lie. Now, that's it. But to hear the media talk about it, this is just a huge conspiracy theory. But the job of the media is supposed to be holding truth to power. They're supposed to look at anytime there's allegations of misuse of power or lying by officials, particularly in the executive branch or in the intel community, and say, okay, it's our job to sort of investigate this. Instead, they do the opposite. They act as mouthpieces for the establishment, for the deep state. And so that's why you get things like you had Cuomo on CNN telling you, you can't read WikiLeaks. You have to come to us to read it. Or you have them saying, if you question the FBI, you're hurting America. Or, demanding transparency from the intel communities damages methods and sources. I mean, this is the same intel community that will spread any leak from any intel agent about Trump. So it's clear that there's a double standard in how this goes. Now, one of the things I want to talk about tonight is I'm starting to see a reaction, and I will go over, for those of you who've listened to me before, I'll go over kind of the grand picture of what I see and the big story with this impeachment case. But before I get that, many of you that have listened to me have heard it. Before I get to that, I want to discuss some of the feedback I'm getting. First off, I'm trying desperately to get a reasonable person that disagrees with me and thinks Trump should be impeached on here. I have some friends in my real life that might be interested in doing it if I get a weekend off, that I could sit down and do a video. I've done one live stream that was very contentious. That was with a person that was, just making insults to me the whole time. So that's not really indicative of how I am. Many live streams I've done both in person and with just people. I could give you one example. I met someone on Twitter. We were arguing one night. I've done probably 10 hours of live streams with that person. He didn't show his face, didn't use his real name. We disagree on a lot. I think that I thought that it's been a very productive conversation, and I think I've made a friend out of that. So I'm not contentious. So if you yourself or if you know anyone who thinks there's a case to impeach Trump that would want to come on, even if they're not a great debater, even if they don't think that they know a lot about the ins and outs of it, I promise that I would treat them with respect. I'd leave them give their point of view, and I'm trying to get that type of thing going on. Until then, I try to also talk about what I believe and why I think this is a coup and why I think there is no case to impeach Trump on various message boards, places like Above Top Secret and Twitter and other places, and have discussions with people. And it amazes me some of the defenses I'm being given of why the information I'm talking about is not a big deal. One of the things that I think is the most, and this is where I condemn Barr, and I condemn a lot of the people connected to Trump and his Justice Department. Joe DiGenova, who's someone I really like, who's been on top of the whole Russiagate thing, and I forget his wife's name, Tenzing, I think is how you pronounce it. They're always on Hannity, and they're very good at talking about the ins and outs of exactly how corrupt the intel agencies were and going after Trump with the whole Russiagate situation. He said, and I did a video on this a couple months ago, after the IG report came out, which recommended criminal prosecution for Comey, and Barr declined to prosecute, DiGenova came out and was like, well, if you're a Trump fan or if you're someone who's tired of the corruption of the deep state, don't expect the IG report, don't expect the Justice Department to bring forth many indictments. And I'm very critical of that. I'm critical of McCabe not being indicted. I'm critical of Comey not being indicted. And I understand the Trump supporter in particular, a lot of people that listen to Coup and things like that, I'm not a big Q follower. I think there's a danger of assuming, oh, everything will work out in the end. Life's not a movie. We see this corruption every day in reality. And to just think it'll all work out in the end, no, I'm not buying it. So when I see evidence of actual crimes that the Justice Department around Trump's not pursuing, I think it's a huge mistake. Now, Genova's theory is it's enough for Barr to out the corruption. And then the American people, no one need to be indicted. The American people will then say, the corruption's been outed and we'll all vote Republican and we live happily ever after. Well, that's garbage. And we can see that in real time. With that particular incident, what happened? Comey literally goes on Twitter that evening and is like, told you, I'm the man. The media starts running defense for him. The narrative becomes, Comey didn't really do anything that bad, even though it was a scathing indictment in just this one section of what would become the IG report. He violated, FBI procedures and policy. He shamed their organization for decades to come. He hurt trust in the agency. Yet Comey's still able to brag. Why is that? It's because the establishment controls the narrative. And you hear me talk about this all the time. They control all of the institutions that control our public narrative. That's the mainstream media. That's the entertainment industry. That's Silicon Valley. That's academia. All of those are almost 95% totally controlled by the establishment, particularly on the left, the establishment Democratic Party. But also Republican neocon establishment like your Jeff Flakes, your John McCain's. That's the establishment. They control that narrative. And so even when a scathing indictment of someone from the intel community like Comey comes out, the public discourse is still, well, no charges, so I guess it wasn't that bad. That's exactly what I see the defense going over and over with this situation. So let me play it out for you in the impeachment scenario and what I'm hearing. The case for impeachment of Donald Trump is that he improperly used his executive power in order to go after a political rival. But as I've argued from day one, and this is a huge mistake that the Republicans are making, you have people like Ben Shapiro and other Republicans, going out saying, well, if Trump did a quid pro quo, well, then that's impeachable. But it's not, because they didn't feel that way under Biden. With Biden, they know he did a quid pro quo, but they say, the quid pro quo must have been legitimate. It must have been in the best interest of the United States. Therefore, that was legitimate. Remember, every single witness, if we believe every witness that's come forward so far that we've heard from publicly about Trump, if we take at face value, everything they're saying, everything the Democrats are saying about what they're saying, all that gets us is to where we already are with Biden, that Trump engaged in a quid pro quo. Now, I don't think we are there, but let's just say for the sake of argument, you still have to prove that Trump's intent with that quid pro quo was corrupt. In other words, you have to prove he didn't really care about outing corruption. He didn't really care about Burisma. He didn't really care about the possible misuse of $1 billion U.S. tax dollars. He didn't really care about CrowdStrike and then possibly misleading people in the Russia investigation. And no one's been able to remotely prove that. The problem is never Trump Republicans, or even some Republicans that aren't never Trump, they've fallen for the trap of those that control the narrative, which is they've allowed the narrative to be spun. Well, if Trump did this, it's extortion and bribery, and that's the end of the game. He needs to be impeached. And so the entire fight's taking place on this level of, was there a quid pro quo or wasn't there? Was there extortion or wasn't there? That's fine, you can have that fight, but it's irrelevant to the grand scheme. Was it legitimate to investigate Joe Biden? Yes, it was. I've proven that many times over. Therefore, there's no case to impeachment. Now, getting back to this idea of no one being indicted, here's what happens, though. One of the defenses I'm seeing is, well, tell me, if the intel community didn't indict Joe Biden when it happened, then clearly he did nothing wrong. Look at how many people connected to Trump have been indicted. Look at how many charges there were in the Mueller investigation. Therefore, Trump guilty, Biden not. And this is an absurd standard, because in reality, what's happening is people like me were laughed at when I voted for Trump and when I talked about things like a deep state. And by the way, you might be thinking, crazy tinfoil hat, right-wing Rob, which I am. I'm a Republican. I dig the Freedom Caucus. My favorite politician ever was Ron Paul. I'm a small government Republican. So you could say, this is just an anti-government Rob, which, by the way, I'm no anarchist. I really believe in government, etc. But nonetheless, it's just me coming from the right that's distrustful of the government. But remember, the left was hugely distrusting of the government for years. In fact, my awakening I'm 35 years old. So for me, I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. And my kind of distrust, of course, I was someone who didn't follow politics very much in high school, I was rah, 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 someone needs to go down for attacking us on 9/11. But as I started to get a little older and I got into college, there was just the nature of it, this anti-war movement in college. And I started to become against the Iraq war and question the Afghanistan war. Not that I had a problem with going after Islamic terrorists, not at all. In fact, you'll see I'm a huge supporter of that. But were we lied to in the Iraq war? Should we just believe the intel community? Were things like the Patriot Act, us giving up our Fourth Amendment rights in the name of security, was that a good idea? I was critical of all that. Most of the people that were most vocal in being critical of that with me were friends that I made that were left-wing friends. So even though we didn't agree on domestic policy and things like that, how big government should be, we agreed that and I still feel this today, one of the most important things we could do when deciding what type of government we want is stop incredibly disastrous foreign regime change wars that lead to innocent people overseas and our own innocent soldiers, most of which happen to come from poorer families and more rural communities. Stop leaving them die in these wars. That to me is one of the basic things that we should agree on. That's why someone like Jimmy Dore, I disagree with all of his SJW crap. I think he's hilarious. I think he's a really good listen, and you should follow his YouTube channel. But most of his domestic policy, he's like a Bernie supporter. But I was able to work with Bernie supporters because I felt, yes, we're both distrusting of this military-industrial complex, this deep state. We're not just willing to take their lies. We've been lied to once too many. And if you remember, the mainstream media was on this track as well. They said, oh, we're so sorry we are lied into the Iraq war. That's our mistake. We didn't question the intel communities hard enough. Next time we'll do a better job. Well, that's totally gone out the wayside. 12 years later, they're telling us not only would they not question the intel community, and we have to believe everything they say, but if me or you decide to do the media's job and question them, then we're actually harming the country. And this sort of appeal to authority, we have to trust the intel community. So the same people that 12 years ago were against the Iraq war and said, we don't trust the intel community, then when, they act like I've changed. Oh, how could you support Trump? How have you changed from when we were friends in college? I haven't changed at all. My political beliefs today remarkably align with my political beliefs 12, 13 years ago. I'm still distrusting of the military-industrial complex and the deep state. I'm still distrusting of foreign regime change wars. I believe things like this. I'm not a pacifist, but I believe before we bomb a country, we should have definitive proof that they deserve it. So, for example, I was against Trump when he bombed Syria because I didn't see proof at all offered from the intel community that Assad gassed his own people. I saw propaganda from the White Helmets. I saw an admission from General Mattis that the last time that we said Assad gassed his people, we still had no proof of that a year later, and yet still we bombed him. Now that's someone I support, Trump. I was very critical of him for that. But that's me being consistent. I'm not just going to take the intel community people at their word anymore. They've lied to us over and over. They've either lied or just been remarkably wrong. Overthrowing the Shah, backing Fidel Castro, backing the rebels in Libya, arming the Taliban in the 70s in Afghanistan. Over and over again, they get us in these disastrous regime change wars that they and their families aren't involved with. And by the way, I'm no hero. I'm not a soldier. I never went over. But the real people that went over there, and I don't care what the reasons were, if they just did it for a GI Bill, none of that matters to me. Those people put their life on the line. Most of them don't come from politicians' family or intel officials' families. Those are the people that suffer. Those are the people that, in the name of what? Getting some military-industrial people, some deep state people, some more money in their pockets. They're over there suffering, dying. That's what I'm against. That's what the left used to be against. But now the left and the media, they're the party of war, of never-ending war. The greatest trick that the neocons ever played was convincing the left to adopt their policies. How was Barack Obama different than George Bush when it comes to foreign regime change policies? He dropped more bombs than any president before him. Again, that's not to say we shouldn't be fighting ISIS or Al-Qaeda. The real problem is we're arming them. So like in Syria, we're arming al-Nusra. We're arming Al-Qaeda. We're the ones who first armed the Taliban in the 70s because we want them to fight these proxy wars. So constantly we get involved in foreign overseas battles. We arm rebels, and then 20 years later we tell our American people, oh, you have to give up your rights and send your children over to fight these former rebels we armed because now they're the greatest threat to us. Over and over again. But we have to pretend that those people that push us to that, we can't look at them being wrong or that's unpatriotic somehow. That's nonsense. Now, I know a lot of people believe this, and a lot of people that support Trump. A lot of people that hate Trump believe that. So how are you going to trust the very people that hate Trump? Those same people, the intel community that's saying, oh, and the deep state, at the State Department, all them. How are you going to be distrustful of them when they want these foreign regime change wars? But when it comes to hating Trump, yep, you're all in for it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to like Trump. I'm not saying that. But can't you see there's a bigger threat? The idea of unelected bureaucrats in our country, whether they be in the intel agencies, the most powerful intel and investigative agencies in the history of the world, that have technology that could literally spy on everything involving your life, that at a moment's notice, just as Roger Stone, could break into your house with armed people, drag you out in your underwear while CNN films it. They could totally destroy your life, unlike any investigative or intel agency in the history of the world. Violate all of your rights. A FISA court, they give 99% approval to violating your Fourth Amendment rights to these people. Those people doing like Chuck Schumer admitted and making the president fearful to even criticize him, that's a far bigger threat to our country than anything Russia could do, or China could do, or the Ukraine could do, or the UK, or France, or all of them combined could do. Yet we constantly have to just nod our heads and capitulate to these people. And so the defense I constantly get when I said I'm voting for Trump, and even Bernie at the time, my dream election was Trump versus Bernie, because, and again, this is a distinction, listen to me here, because there was a chance that both of them were considered outsiders by the establishment. Now you might say, well, I don't think Trump's an outsider, or I don't think Bernie's an outsider. Fair enough. I don't think Bernie is at this point. I still do think Trump is. But you don't have to believe that. What you have to believe is, here's a group of people that have had basically a monopoly on power in this country for 30 years. They don't even want to take the chance that they lose that. Not, we might be able to convince this person to come on board with us. No. They wanted Jeb Bush. They wanted Hillary Clinton. Those type of people. They don't want to take a chance with Bernie or with Trump. By the way, if you think Bernie will ever win the nomination, you're mistaken. No matter how much Bernie kisses their butt and takes a second lake house and says, I'm sorry, I'll criticize Trump for not protecting the Kurds and wanting to pull out of Syria. No matter how much he capitulates, they'll never trust him. They'll never put him in. So that's why you got Elizabeth Warren, someone who could co-opt all of Bernie's ideas, but still be trustworthy to the intel people. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling here, but the point is, that's why I voted for Trump. Not because I thought Trump was playing 4D chess, not even because I thought Trump was the most moral man in the world or, super intelligent. It was because I knew the very nature of him winning, which, by the way, I thought he had no chance, even when he was nominated. Shocked. I was shocked the night of the election when he won. But I knew that if he won, it would force places like the media, it would force the intel agencies, they would come out of the woodwork to attack this man like no president before. Which is exactly what's happened. They've outed themselves in the most public way to being antagonistic to what the American people voted for. And it's not because Trump's a genius. Maybe he's smarter than I'm giving him credit for. I think Trump's a pretty smart guy. But I think it's because they couldn't help themselves. And because they have hubris. They think because they control the narrative so much, they're betting that controlling of the narrative will mean that they could basically put all the chips on the table and basically all but say, yes, we're corrupt. We're taking down a president. And enough people will hate Trump because they control the narrative that they're willing to accept that. And then that's my biggest fear. The gamble's high with Trump because it's almost the best thing that could happen for the deep state if no one's held accountable. If the DOJ under Trump doesn't actually charge any of these coup plotters. Because now, if Trump had never been elected, if it was Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton, you would still have people like me out there saying, look, this is garbage, this is a bunch of deep state garbage, blah, 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 blah. We need to get someone in there to fight it. And they would deny it, and back and forth we go. And the media would pretend to be unbiased and pretend to be critical of the intel agencies. But now what's happened, because it's Trump, they're all in. The media is not even trying anymore. 95% are totally against Trump, totally for the intel community, the establishment Democrats. And with all of that out on the table, if the American people don't wake up and see it, then they've won. They realize now, the one thing that these people have is kind of operating in the shadows and slowly and incrementally. They didn't want, it's like I talk about, why does Pelosi and AOC, what's their disagreement about? Is the disagreement that AOC's radical and Pelosi's less radical? No. Pelosi's every bit as radical as AOC. It's just Pelosi's smarter. Pelosi understands that in order to strip people of their rights, like their Second Amendment rights, in order to strip them of their First Amendment rights, in order to totally control any dissent and, get total control over Silicon Valley and eliminate hate speech and destroy all competitors to the mainstream media and make people be so fearful that they will no longer own cars, and you control every aspect of their life in the name of fighting climate change, and you have abortions on demand. All of these social engineering policies that Pelosi wants all of that. But she's smart enough to know you have to do it slowly. That's why the Democrats, they'll constantly, we were told, how many of you heard this? Like 5-6 years ago, you'd say, hey, these Democrat policies, this is sounded dangerously like socialism. Oh, no, this isn't socialism. Now, 2 years into Trump, it's, of course we're socialists. Socialism's awesome, right? Or you were told, hey, this sounds like your arguments on guns here sounds like you're basically going to try to confiscate guns. No, we would never do that. To now, yes, of course we would try to confiscate guns. Or, boy, it really sounds like you're kind of coming close to advocating open borders. Oh my goodness, we would never do that. To, well, we're not calling it open borders, but we think it should be decriminalized. They should get free healthcare, free schooling. They shouldn't be deported for just coming here illegally. Yeah, that's open borders. Right? What's the same way with all of these policies? Pelosi hates AOC because AOC just let the cat out of the bag. The problem is, if the people vote for AOC's plans, then Pelosi's going to be like, okay, great. I guess we can accelerate the destruction of America and the stripping of people's rights. It's the same way here. It's a setback. Trump winning was unexpected for these deep state people. But they're doing their damnedest to make sure. They're worried. Trump could out us. There could be mass cry to stop this corruption. Not necessarily from people that think Trump's awesome. There could be people that like Trump, people that dislike Trump, but they understand that this corruption from the deep state that's now outing themselves publicly is absurd. And you see this from leftists. Like I said, Jimmy Dore. You see Glenn Greenwald. You see people like Matt Taibbi. You see people like Michael Tracy. These are people that hate Trump. They want him out of office. But they understand the corruption of the intel community, of the establishment Democratic Party as well. Now, I would quibble with them. I think they should get more on board with Trump, even if they personally hate him, because defending him at this point is the greater good for this country and outing the greater enemy. But I digress. At least they're on the right side of the issue, not trusting the intel community. So that's where I'm coming from when I vote for Trump. Now, I was told by people that wanted Hillary that that's all a joke. There is no establishment. There is no deep state. That's a joke. They don't operate like that. There's not just this appeal to this authority. That's not the way things are. And every day that's proven more and more that that's exactly the way things are. Now, the first defense I hear of the impeachment against Trump and bringing up any evidence that shows either Trump hasn't committed any high crime or misdemeanor, or that he had every right to want to investigate the corruption that occurred in the Ukraine to help the Democrats. The first defense that I hear from people is, well, the intel agency said nothing was wrong. All the State Department people hated Trump. Look at how many people were charged by the FBI. Roger Stone just went to Roger Stone went to jail. Let's reopen an investigation into whether or not Trump lied to Mueller about contacts with WikiLeaks. And that's constantly this appeal to authority. Well, it's the same with Joe Biden. Joe Biden was well within his rights to extort Ukraine with $1 billion to fire the prosecutor looking into his son's company. Why? Well, because everyone in the EU said it was cool. And the IMF said it was cool. And Obama's State Department all said it was cool. And Obama's intel agents all said it was cool. So, therefore, end of story. But wait a minute. This is exactly what I was criticizing. This is exactly why I voted for Trump. Trump said, drain the swamp. You all laughed and said there is no swamp. Now you're saying, of course there's a swamp. They all agree that Trump's bad. That's not a defense. It's no more of a defense than to say, all of those groups were for the Iraq War, Mr. Leftist, Mr. Bernie Sanders. You were against that, right? And all the people like him. Now these people say I've changed. I was against the Iraq War, was critical of the intel agents then, was critical of our military-industrial complex in the deep state, said the game was rigged. I mean, these are left-wing talking points. Of course, the right talked about them too, people like Ron Paul. But we shared that, right? We were distrusting of the establishment. We said the game is rigged. They won't leave a third party in. Right? That's where I'm coming from. I'm not the one who's changed. I'm not the one all of a sudden that's saying, no, we have to take unelected bureaucrats' words as gospel. Hey, thanks, Cindy. Now, all this is coming out, by the way. Why is it coming out now? Well, one, because they put all their eggs in the Mueller basket and that failed miserably. But second, they know the IG report and the Durham report are going to be coming out. So one of the things I said in the testimony of Yovanovitch, she said this over and over. And if you caught my live stream, the last live stream I did, you heard me mention this. Yovanovitch constantly said, well, Ukraine, the election interference, everybody knows the intel agencies looked at it and they said it was Russia. Well, that's not an answer. Just let's assume that Russia did interfere in the election. Okay, that doesn't mean that Ukraine couldn't have. The implication she's making is, well, if there was a problem, the intel agents would have done something about it. But the problem with that is, what if we find out in the IG report that's coming out that the intel agents were basically corrupt in their opening of the Russia investigation? Because, spoiler alert, that's what we're going to find out. We're going to find out things like they used an unverified opposition research in the Steele dossier in order to spy on an American who was connected to a presidential campaign. I said at the time, in early 2017, that if we find out that's the case, that one party paid for opposition research that was unverified and came from Kremlin officials in order to spy on the other party, that was the biggest political scandal in the history of our country. And that's true, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Once they realized that was, oh shit, we can't say that, the dossier was the start of the investigation. It looks really bad now. Because remember, the Democrats lied about paying for that for a year. And they tried to say, no, actually it was, Republicans paid for it. No, that wasn't the case. So the Democrats lied about paying for that for a year. So once it came out, then they were like, okay, well, that actually wasn't the start of the investigation. The start was July 31st, 2016. And it was because this guy, Papadopoulos. Now, if you haven't seen my videos on this, I recommend just Google or YouTube search me, Papadopoulos, and I think I did some good videos on it. So to start, their story, this is their story. This is their version without getting into any ridiculous details of what's wrong with the story. Their story is this. George Papadopoulos, who was a periphery person in Trump's campaign, heard from a professor that Russians might have dirt on Hillary. Now, he contacted Trump's team and was like, hey, I heard this dirt might exist. And they were like, yeah, don't pursue this. Nonetheless, he then talks to some woman who then puts him in touch with some guy who's Russian and is like, yes, we have dirty emails on Hillary Clinton. Okay. Then he gets drunk at a bar. He doesn't get the dirt. He doesn't offer, hey, if you give us the dirt, we'll do this. He doesn't tell them to look for more dirt in Hillary. He doesn't have anyone in the Trump campaign saying, yes, keep trying to get this dirt. None of that. He just gets drunk and he tells some Australian diplomat, hey man, this Russian guy told me they got emails to make Hillary look bad. Now, based on that story, we had to start a 3-year-long investigation looking into Donald Trump, looking into crimes he had going back 10 years, looking into all of his associates, raiding his lawyers in the middle of the night, spying on people connected to the campaign. Based on that, a periphery character drunkenly saying, I heard some Russians say they have dirt on Hillary? I said at the time, I said, this is patently absurd. So you mean to tell me if I want the FBI to investigate the Democrats, all I need to do is convince some low-level guy on their campaign to just get drunk and say, I heard that China has dirt on Trump. Okay, now investigate every Democrat. That's ridiculous. And everyone who looks at this objectively would know, wait a minute, that's it? That's the start of the Russia investigation? This Papadopoulos guy? The story gets worse, though, because it all starts with this supposed super secret Russian asset, Joseph Mifsud. He's the professor that originally tells George Papadopoulos that he knows that Russians have these emails about Hillary. Okay? That's the official story. He somehow has connection with Russian espionage. Okay? The people that hacked and got these emails. By the way, the emails that were being mentioned here have nothing to do with a hack. People had for 3 years, once they found out about Hillary's server, been assuming that foreign actors like China and Russia had hacked it because it was unprotected and in our bathroom. So if you were going to make up a story, if you were Russian or otherwise anyone who was trying to make up a story, and you said you had evidence of shadiness from one of the candidates, wouldn't you the first thing you'd come up with was, yeah, emails. That server she had was unprotected. We got into it. But that isn't where the emails came from. Not only do we not have any proof that, as far as I'm concerned, that the emails came from Russia, WikiLeaks claims they didn't. I trust WikiLeaks over the FBI that was unwilling to even look at the server that was hacked. But I digress. So anyways, this guy Joseph Mifsud, he's the start of all of it, right? Now remember, this isn't in the vacuum. Remember that Robert Mueller also felt it worthwhile, and I'll get to this in a moment, how it applies to the coup as well. Mueller also felt it was worthwhile to charge 12 Russian trolls. Now, if you don't know what these Russian trolls were doing, here's what they were doing. They were on Twitter and Facebook, and they were posting memes, and they were posting kind of just fake stories. Many of them were critical of Hillary, but some of them were pro-Black Lives Matter, pro-LGBT. Most of what they put wasn't even viewed until after the election. After the election, these same groups ended up doing things like spurring rallies against Trump. They used Pokemon Go. For those of you who don't know what Pokemon Go is, so it's a game on your phone. It's one of those, like, what do they call them, like ARD games, where it's like augments real life, and it'll look like there's a little Pokemon there, and you throw a little ball. They put messages on Pokemon Go that were like, yeah, Hillary sucks. Again, another story that's so laughable. We were told that was them hacking our election. We had to have meetings on Capitol Hill. We had to talk about government control over social media. Because we were to believe that 95% of the media being for Hillary, almost $1 trillion in ads being spent on that election cycle between the Trump and Hillary campaigns, 2/3 of which was for Hillary. Despite all of that, a couple Russian trolls using less than $100,000 worth of ads were able to outweigh all that. It's laughable. But to this day, the Democrats say that was a huge deal. And that when you say, look, the Mueller investigation was a sham, they'll say, 12, look at all the people that were indicted. 12 Russian trolls, they were indicted. Okay, so if you're going to indict these low-level trolls, and by the way, the last aside on that, a judge has ruled that actually there is no connection whatsoever with those trolls and Putin, and therefore people like Mueller can no longer claim that Putin ordered them to do this. They just happen to be 12 Russian people. Okay. But regardless, if those people were worth indicting, then don't you think that the actual guy who had contact, that knew that Hillary's emails were supposedly hacked, that set the whole thing in motion, he's the one who sent Papadopoulos. He was the one physically trying to infiltrate the Trump campaign. A Russian spy. That's the Mueller version. That's the Democrats' version of what happened. Now, Mueller also admits in his report, that this same guy Mifsud, this Russian spy, the one who started it all, trying to infiltrate our election system. Not just putting troll posts on Facebook. Really trying to... This is their version, right? He then gets interviewed by the FBI. He lies to them 3 times, according to Mueller. Now, don't forget, the FBI charged Papadopoulos for lying to them. They charged Flynn with lying to them. So they got this guy dead to rights, right? Lock him up right there. He lied to the FBI. At least file charges, then try to get him and try to flip and try to get to more people that were Russians that tried to infiltrate the election, right? No, wrong. They don't charge him with anything. And then, when Mueller's asked by Jim Jordan this, in the Mueller hearing, he says, wait a minute. This guy started it all. You guys are saying he's a Russian spy. You guys are saying he lied to the FBI 3 times. So why didn't you charge him if you're going to charge 12 Russian trolls that basically did nothing? And Mueller says, that was beyond my purview. In other words, the most successful piece of Russian hacking, Mifsud and the Steele dossier, because remember, the Steele dossier was sourced by Kremlin officials. Mueller on both of those issues said, oh, we didn't bother to look into that Russian interference. So any Russian interference that could look bad for Hillary, they didn't look into, or look bad for the intel community or the Democrats. Now, why am I bringing all this up? Because there's only 2 possibilities with Joseph Mifsud being allowed to walk free by Mueller. The first possibility is, inexplicably, the Russian spy who started it all, who's way more impactful than 12 Russian trolls, Bob Mueller just decided to let off the hook, even though he had him dead to rights. Or, as Jim Jordan says, and this is probably the truth, Joseph Mifsud was Western intelligence, whether he was working directly with the CIA or with the MI6 in the UK. In other words, the entire reason that we've been given as to why the Russia investigation needed to start, this Papadopoulos scenario, Now we know the end of it is Papadopoulos tells this Australian diplomat named Downer. Downer happens to be someone who facilitated huge loans going to the Clinton Foundation from the Australian government. So he's an ally of the Clintons. And so the guy at the end that ultimately gets the information is a Clinton ally involved with the intel agencies. And the guy who starts it is also involved with the intel agencies. The whole story was a lie the entire time. They basically said, we'll tell some low-level guy connected to Trump a rumor, and then when he spits that rumor back out on the other end, that's our excuse to spy on the Trump campaign. That is so much shadier than what I already called the biggest political scandal in the history of the country, using op-ed research that was unverified to spy on your political opponent. This is 10 times worse than that. Now, I've been talking about this since before the Mueller report, and certainly after it. I've yet to get any credible defense of this from anyone who knows that Trump's guilty. They know he's a Russian stooge. Okay, then explain the situation of Joseph Mifsud to me. They can't. They just say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. And what do they say? If he had done something wrong, Mueller and the intel community would have charged him. Now, when you know this, there's only two explanations. Either Mueller and the intel community are incredibly inept, or they're corrupt. But the very defense that people like Yovanovitch and Taylor and Kent and all these witnesses have given is, well, clearly there was no Ukrainian election interference, or the intel community would have picked it up. You mean the same intel community that we already have proof the IG saying the head of it, James Comey, violated procedures because of his bias against Trump? That Peter Strzok also, the IG report and him said when looking at the Hillary investigation, that he was not comfortable saying that Strzok's admitted bias for Hillary and against Trump didn't affect his decision to basically not look at the Wiener laptop, which is funny to say always, to not look at it and instead start focusing on Trump-Russia. But we just have to take that intel community at their word. So the same leftists that 12 years ago were saying, shame on anyone who takes the intel agency's word without proof, are now telling me, of course there's no need. Not only is there no need to question the intel agencies, but if Trump does it, if Trump says, I think we should investigate Joe Biden, for example, or Hunter Biden, this situation. Now it's a crime for Trump to even do that because the intel agencies that we know were corrupt and out to get Trump didn't say there was a problem with Biden. Now, I thought about this, so what am I talking about here? I'm talking a lot about kind of the corruption of the intel community, right? Let me go back and show you something I wrote on Above Top Secret. My name's Grambler on there. So let me go back and show you something I wrote, and hopefully, let me check it real quick and make sure you guys can see this. Let me just read. This is from a Daily Caller article. I wrote this in December 5th, 2017. Okay? Now, I don't know if you knew this, but weirdly enough, the entire investigation into Hillary's email server and into Trump Russia, the point man for all of this was Peter Strzok. Now, you might remember Peter Strzok as he's the one who was sleeping with Lisa Page, and he said he could smell Trump supporters in Walmart, and they needed an insurance policy, etc., etc. Okay, that's the agent who's doing all of these investigations when it comes to the Hillary case and when it comes to the Trump-Russia case. Now, one of the things that shocked me to learn, because I was naive, I can't believe that this is still the case, but the FBI actually doesn't video or audio record when they're doing interviews with people. Instead, they rely on notes that the agents take, which is incredibly shady. We're seeing all sorts of shadiness with the Flynn account, where it's basically notes that Strzok took, that we said Strzok took for 2 years in the Flynn case. It turned out now it was the other guy. So that they're admitting that there was a huge mistake. But let me just read a little about this story. So Strzok, remember, the case with Flynn was he originally came out and told the FBI, I don't think he was lying to us on purpose or anything like that. Didn't recommend charges. Mueller comes in and recommends charges because the entire idea, as the judge in the Flynn case said originally was, or maybe it was the Manafort case, it was never about getting Flynn or Manafort or Papadopoulos. It's about getting Trump and hoping that one of these low-level guys would flip. So let's read this from the Daily Caller. It says, the FBI agent who was fired from Special Counsel Mueller's Russia investigation team for sending anti-Trump text messages conducted the interviews with 2 Hillary Clinton aides accused of giving false statements about what they knew of the former Secretary of State's private email server. Neither of the Clinton associates, Cheryl Mills or Huma Abedin, faced legal consequences for their misleading statements, which they made in interviews last year with former FBI Section Chief Peter Strzok. Okay, let's see what Huma and Mills said from the same source. A review of those documents conducted by the Daily Caller shows that Mills and Abedin told Strzok and Loffman, those were the two FBI agents, that they were not aware of Clinton's server until after she left the State Department. Quote, Mills did not learn Clinton was using a private server until after Clinton's Department of State tenure. Reads note from Mills' April 9, 2016 interview. Mills stated she was not even sure she knew what a server was at the time. Abedin also denied knowing about Clinton's server until leaving the State Department in 2013. Abedin did not know but Clinton had a private server until about a year and a half ago when it became public knowledge, the summary of Strzok's interview with Abedin said. Continuing. But undercutting those denials are email exchanges in which both Mills and Abedin either directly discussed or was involved in discussing Clinton's server. HRC email coming back. Is server okay? Mills asked in a February 27, 2010 email to Abedin and Cooper, a longtime aide to Bill Clinton who helped set up the server. You're funny, we're on the same server, Cooper replied. Mills and Abedin were also involved in an August 30th, 2011 exchange, in which State Department official Stephen Mull mentioned that Clinton's email server is down. And in January 9th, 2011 email exchange, Cooper told Abedin that Clinton's server had been malfunctioning because, quote, someone was trying to hack us. Had to shut down the server, wrote Cooper, who told the FBI in his interviews that he discussed Clinton's server with Abedin in 2009 when it was being set up. Now, why am I bringing all this up? What does this have to do with anything? Now, you can go back, you could read that entire thread that I'm on there. No one at all has any argument as to maybe Mills and Abedin didn't lie. We know it. It's proven. We know that they lied. They said we didn't know about the server until after she was Secretary of State in 2013. We see from their own emails that that's a lie. Heck, Mills even went so far as to just do the old Hillary, what do you mean, wipe it like with a cloth? A server? I don't even know what a server is. Now, we know from their released emails that that's a lie. They lied to the FBI. And this isn't an immaterial lie. It's a lie about the specific thing that was being investigated. So it's not like they lied and said, by the way, I never eat shrimp. Well, here's a picture of you eating shrimp. Yeah, but what's that have to do with the case? The question was about this server and whether or not it was proper. What were the motivations? The only thing that got Hillary Clinton off the hook, remember? Hey, what's up, Michelle? The only thing that got Hillary off the hook was her intent, even though that wasn't something that was necessary to indict on a crime. That's why Comey left her off the hook. So your two personal aides and closest lawyers and assistants lying to the FBI about knowledge of that server is a big deal. Yet I've yet to see one person say, well, they didn't lie. They just say, well, who cares? Now explain to me why Flynn and Papadopoulos and now Roger Stone today, or Cohen, why they're getting treated so harshly for lying to Congress or the FBI, but we have actual proof that me and you could read that Mills and Abedin lied to the FBI and no charges. And the reason is, have you ever watched Law and Order? Have you ever watched any criminal show or movie? Like, I'm not a lawyer, but I intuitively understand a little bit about how investigations work. Like, for example, if you had to choose A or B, you're investigators and you're trying to get to the bottom of what you think is a very serious crime with very powerful people committing it. You have two choices to go about it. You could A, start charging lesser people connected to it with crimes that you think you have a better case of making, and then push them to give them lighter sentences if they flip on people above them. Or B, give everyone immunity and say, hey, would you guys like to tell us if anyone did anything wrong? If you guessed A, you'd be right. That's how a proper investigation should happen. And you know how I know that? Because that's how the FBI investigation of Trump and his associates went. That's how the Mueller investigation went. That's how pretty much every serious investigation from any serious police force ever goes. Whether it be your local drug ring in your town, going after Trump associates, investigating foreign election interference. Right? That's how credible investigations go down. The way they don't go down, just take it to like, you have a local drug ring. You bust the dealer on the street and you say, okay, you're looking at 10 years in jail for selling coke. Unless you could flip on who your dealer is, give us some bigger fish, right? Your local police force would never go, okay, we caught you selling coke. We're going to give you immunity and say you can't be charged with anything. Would you like to voluntarily tell us who your dealer is? What do you think the chances are of them voluntarily giving up information that they already haven't voluntarily gave up? Slim to none. Yet that's exactly what the FBI did. That's what Strzok, that's what Page, that's what Comey, that's what McCabe, that's what Baker, that's what Rebecca. All of these people that we hear discussing, for example, before Comey goes in and talks to Trump about the P dossier, make sure you record everything he says. This could be potential evidence to take Trump down later. Yet they were uninterested in when people connected to Hillary admittedly lied to them about specifically what the case was about, the server. Now, when I bring this up, and this is the problem with me, I come up with this stuff, not many people are talking about it. And people just ignore it, and then the news, I'm guilty of it as anyone. I allow these people to control the narrative, and so I forget about it. So I thought of that today when I'm hearing about Roger Stone's case. What did Roger Stone do? He's looking at 50 years. For what? Supposedly lying to the FBI. He was drug out in front of CNN cameras in his underwear while he was at home with his wife when FBI agents raided it with guns drawn to drag him out in the middle of the night for supposedly the crime of lying to the FBI. Now, we know Mills and Abedin lied to the FBI. Not only that, their team deleted subpoenaed evidence. So everything that Stone's accused of, except we have definitive proof, and worse. Yet they weren't charged. But the defense of why Trump's bad and needs impeached and why we don't even need to look into Biden is these same people that were running the show back then when Biden was going on and decided not to look into it and are saying it's illegal to look at it, they don't feel there's a problem. And not just the intel people. That is the legal investigative methods, right? Don't get me wrong. The FBI, the CIA, the NSA, all of those groups, right? Attorney generals, deputy attorney generals, New York attorney general, all of those groups, right? But what about the media? They couldn't investigate? Now, damn sure. Like, we saw Anna Navarro. We saw people saying, we hope that Roger Stone rots in hell. These are media people. Yet they didn't even feel it remotely interested in even reporting what some fat guy on a couch like me could find from publicly available evidence. That Mills and Abedin blatantly lied to the FBI. By the way, I don't have it on me now, but somewhere I'll dig it out. Maybe I'll show this at some point. FBI text records that were released as a result of the IG proved that the FBI agents that were discussing Hillary Clinton's interview thought that she, quote, quote, defied credulity that she thought the C at the top of documents meant alphabetical order. In other words, they thought that was BS and she was lying. Yet she wasn't charged with lying. No one was. Destroyed subpoenaed evidence, lied to the FBI, had a private server that was against the rules. No punishment whatsoever for anyone connected to that. Instead, everybody gets immunity and then they say, okay, would you like to say anything? Nope. Okay. Then that, even though it's just blatantly even if you don't want to believe it's corrupt, anyone who's remotely objective would have to say that is the most incompetent handling of an investigation of all time. Yet still to this day, we're supposed to forget about that. The media and the people I'm talking to online and the Democrats, they say, they always default to that authority. The intel community, the FBI thinks what Trump did was wrong. The State Department employees think what Trump did was wrong. The media thinks what Trump did was wrong. And they don't think anything that Hillary or Biden or any of them did was wrong. So that's it. End of discussion. That's nonsense. That's not a defense. And it wouldn't work the other way. Imagine saying, well, there's no need to investigation in anything Trump ever does because Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson and Rush Limbaugh and Boris Johnson and the president of India, right? Zelensky in the Ukraine, they all say everything's cool, so no need to investigate anything. What do you think the left would say? Or let's just say Trump flies off the hinge and starts bombing people. And the military-industrial complex is like, oh, okay, yeah, this is good. Woo! Right? You think that would be good? Hey, the CIA said it was right for Trump to bomb Canada, or, that's not going to happen, obviously, but, it was right for Trump to bomb Yemen into oblivion. It was right for him to, put 10 times more troops back in Afghanistan or Iraq. Now all of a sudden you have Bernie bros coming out of the work going, wait a minute, man, give peace a chance. Wait, what's going on? Oh, shut your mouth. The intel agency said it was cool. They said it was cool. So, that's it. You told us we have to believe them. By the way, isn't it ironic, Bernie? Every time Bernie... By the way, I haven't heard anyone talk about this, so just hear me out for a second. When you ask people like Bernie, dude, where are you going to get the $60 trillion to pay for all of your projects? What's the first thing he says? They're like, well, we're going to tax the super wealthy. Okay. And then the very next thing that they'll say is, and we have all this disastrous military spending we don't need. Which, by the way, they're right about. The difference is, instead of decreasing the amount of money we give to defense, I think that we should bring back the troops and then use that money to pay for their legitimate health care and to pay to keep them to be legitimate defense for our country. But Bernie says, let's take a bunch of that money back. We're wasting this money. Let's take it back and give it, put it into education or healthcare. Well, the first time Bernie has the chance to put his money where his mouth is, where Trump just says, hey, we're going to pull back 2,000 troops from Syria that are costing like $1.5 billion a year. We're going to pull those troops back. Does Bernie say, well, that's a great idea? That's great. Does Bernie say, maybe we should talk this out? No, Bernie says it is the most disastrous foreign policy decision he's ever seen a president make. That's what Bernie was quoted as saying. In other words, we need to keep troops in Syria. Okay then, Bernie, where specifically are you recommending we come back from? Because if Syria meets your threshold for we need to stay there, then what country doesn't? He's just giving the military talking point, the military industrial complex, the intel agency's talking points. But he's pretending, and all of his supporters pretend, they're the Bernie bros, they're for peace. The left is not the party of peace. They're the party of xenophobia, increasing tensions with another superpower in the world, Russia, a nuclear-armed superpower, and keeping foreign regime change wars going on and on. That's who the left is now. They are the neocons. They're just neo-libs. They took George Bush, they slapped Obama's face on it, and everyone said, oh, look, this is a leftist, a community organizer. He's great, so his bombs must be bombs of peace. His foreign regime change wars must make sense. And to this day, it's working that much. I say this all the time. When I was young, as a teenager, I was into punk music, I remember going to a concert, Punk Against Bush, like NoFX and stuff. I remember listening to Bruce Springsteen yelling about the Iraq War. Where were they for 8 years under Obama? You remember any of the albums they came out with about being anti-war? Remember Hollywood complaining about Obama's wars? No? Oh, but then as soon as Trump came in, then it was back to complaining. So the best thing you could do if you're these warmongers is like, dude, put the establishment left in charge. It shuts up all war protest. Everyone will just accept it. Heck, Bernie Sanders, he's considered its big peace guy, peacenik. We got him on national television saying, how dare Trump consider pulling out of Syria? But that's the type of nonsense we're told. We have to believe all this because the intel agents. That's what Yovanovitch is saying. That's what Taylor said. That's what Kent said. Every single time they were asked, what do you think about this Ukraine election interference? And here's another, right, when it comes to them, the witnesses. This is something I find amazing, and they got this from Obama. It's hilarious, but it's actually a shrewd strategy. Have you ever noticed every time they ask them about a news source that's something that's detrimental to Trump, they know it intuitively? Like Yovanovitch, they were like, did you read the reports that Trump said that you were a terrible person? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, yes, I read them. Did you read the reports that said that, what Taylor testified? Oh, yes, I read them. Did you read the reports of Ukrainian politician Lyshenko admitting to interfering in the 2016 election to help Hillary? Oh, I didn't really know about that. No, Isn't that strange? They only seem to consume media that fits along with their narrative. Any media that disproves it, they go, no. For example, George Kent testified in his closed-door hearings that he had no knowledge of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. So did Vindman. Now, these two were supposedly career State Department officials, or military in the case of Vindman, who were experts on the Ukraine. Let me give you my qualifications on the Ukraine. I'm some guy who drank a lot in my 20s. I'm an amateur funny man. I like playing baseball sometimes on the PlayStation 4. Though I don't play as much as I used to. I used to travel with this band, but I wasn't good enough to be in the band. I was just basically kind of a roadie. I watch sports a lot, and I got fed up with the election process, so I ran as a Republican and lost and spent a bunch of my own money. Didn't take $1 in donation. I'm basically the exact opposite of an expert in Ukraine. I would have had trouble pointing to it in a map 2 years ago. Okay? That's my expertise. Yet somehow, I don't have any connections to anyone in Washington at all. I don't have any connections to anyone involved in any sort of media at all. All I have is an internet connection and a computer. Now I've started a YouTube channel. That's it. That's my expertise. But somehow, I knew more about this situation in Ukraine than the so-called experts. Now how can that be? Either these experts are horrible at their job, and they should have been fired, or they're lying to you. You mean to tell me they didn't read the public August 2016 Financial Times report? Where Lyshenko, and I've done it on this page, you've seen me bring it up over and over again, where Lyshenko, this is 2 months before the election, where Lyshenko admits me and people from the Anti-Corruption Bureau are releasing this black ledger because we hate Trump's policies. We think he'll be pro-Putin. We're going to do whatever we can to make sure Hillary wins. He didn't have access to that? Maybe he didn't in 2016. Maybe we can believe that. But did he also not hear about it in 2017 when Politico also interviewed Lyshenko and he said more of the same? And did he also not hear about it leading into his own testimony? When it was being discussed by like Hannity and all these other people and people like me online, he still hadn't heard of it, according to him. That's ridiculous. You're not an expert in Ukraine if that's not the case. They knew who Lyshenko was. They knew that he didn't like Trump, but they didn't know that he made that announcement publicly. Now, is that the person you want at State Department who's in charge with negotiating with these people? It's clearly a lie. And it's just like the same lies Obama would tell. Anytime there was some sort of scandal in his administration, what was his defense? I didn't know about it until I read it in the newspaper. It's the same type of garbage argument. These people want us to believe at one point that even questioning firing Yukhanovich or someone like her in State Department was detrimental to our relationships with Ukraine, was detrimental to the morale of the State Department overall, hurts our ability to communicate and have relations with countries around the world because they're the best people. And to not support them 100% and their agenda, not Trump's agenda, to not support their agenda is detrimental to our country. But on the other hand, they're so inept, they don't even know the base facts about the countries they're dealing with. Unless they read it in the paper. It's ridiculous. And it's obviously a lie. But we're told, as long as all those people agree on something, then we can't look at anything. And so, how does this manifest? I've been going on for an hour now. What does this have to do with impeachment? What are the defenses you've heard? I put out the thread, right, which I think is amazing. The video I did, the last non-live stream video I did, that talks about Democrat witness Kent's own closed-door testimony proves that Yukhanovich and other people at State Department pressured the Ukraine to drop investigations into Obama-allied people, including to drop an investigation into 2016 election interference from Ukrainians that benefited Hillary Clinton. That is the biggest story in this country right now, and I literally hear no one talking about it. No one. John Solomon and me. That's it. No one else. I got 4 people listening to me right now. I busted my hump all weekend trying to promote that thread, which I think is easy to read, which I source every single thing. I use articles from different sites. It's not opinion pieces. These are quotes from the actual officials that I'm talking about, or actual legal documents, or signed government documents from everyone. I go through the actual testimony of George Kent. And I can't get any traction on it. Take out the idea that they pressured the Yevgenovich and George Kent and the other people at State Department. Forget about the idea that they pressured the Ukraine to drop investigations into like the Anti-Corruption Action Center that was paid for by Barack Obama in tangent with George Soros. Just leave that out for a second, right? And there are other groups like that. Democratic donors that were under investigation for improperly giving money in the Ukraine. Things like that. Forget about all that for a second. Before this Ukraine situation, right? Ask yourself this. 5 months ago, right? Right before the Mueller report, even once the Mueller report came out, if I were to ask you, if I was doing a live stream and I was to ask everyone here listening and I said, what do you think the establishment, the Democrats, the media, heck, even Republicans, what do you think they would say is the biggest deal to investigate right now that's a danger to our country? And I bet 90% of you would say, well, Russian interference, foreign interference. That's what we've been looking at for 3 years. That's what the Mueller report's going to be out. We were told it was an act of war. We were told it was the gravest threat to our country, that it could destroy our election systems. Right? That's what we were told. Over and over. By the media, by the Democrats, by some Republicans, by academics, by the entertainment industry, right? All the stars of the Avenger movies, they were putting out videos. Oh, can you believe what's going on? Remember, you had celebrities reading the Mueller report? All in the name of foreign election interference was that damning. That was the idea. That's what we were told verbatim, over and over. We couldn't get on with the business of governance. We couldn't get on with solving real problems like the national debt or the opioid crisis or veterans not getting health care or having an open border. We couldn't do any of that. Right? That's what we were told. That's how grave of a threat foreign election interference was. Now today, we're being told that foreign election interference, it isn't a big deal at all. At all. Foreign election interference have benefited Hillary. Go back, check out my video I did on Fiona Hill. Hill's going to be testifying Wednesday. I'll re-upload the video, or at least I'll do a video and readdress it. Fiona Hill in her closed-door testimony. She's being asked by Castor, I believe, who's the counsel for the Republicans. I could be wrong, though. It could be Ratcliffe. It's irrelevant. One of the Republicans asked her, what do you think about Lyshenko kind of releasing this black ledger and interfering in the election? And she hems and haws. She's like, well, I don't think that's really the government of Ukraine. No, it's just a government official. 12 Russian trolls wasn't the government of Russia, but they all thought that was a huge deal. Well, I don't think it was a blah, 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 blah. And they keep asking her. And finally, this is what she says. And if you don't believe me, go check out my video. I link right to her testimony. This is what she says. Almost verbatim. She says, look, I don't think the American people were that worried about this type of interference. I know my family, the reason they voted was education and healthcare and things like that. So I don't think this was a big deal. Fast forward a page later. What do you think she called the United States' quote, Achilles heel? Russian election interference. Now this is how ridiculous these people are. They are so used to not even have to lie well because they control the narrative. They could literally tell you one thing to your face and then 3 seconds later take the exact opposite position. So, election interference that benefited Hillary? Hey, look, election interference isn't important. Education, healthcare, those are the real things. Oh, okay, so you don't have a problem with election interference? Oh, Russian election interference is our Achilles heel. But wait a minute, I thought you just think things like healthcare and education were important. Oh no, Russia interference. In other words, any interference that could have possibly hurt Trump is fine. Any interference that could have possibly hurt Hillary, that's devastating. That's our Achilles heel. And every single one of these witnesses have said the same thing. Every single one of them. They have the same agenda. They have the same policy. That's what they're about. They give themselves away when they talk. Well, Trump went against our foreign policy or the foreign policy. No, Trump is the foreign policy. He sets the policy. Your job is to help implement his foreign policy. And if you have a problem with it, you could do like Mattis did and resign. Your job is not to subvert him. Your job is not to talk to your counterpart in Ukraine, as Vindman admitted, and say, well, you shouldn't get involved with this. Possible investigations into Biden. That's not your job. But that's what this is. And every single one of them have repeatedly said, every time Ukrainian election interference is brought up, that's been debunked, and the intel agents have all said Russia was the election interference. But that's non-responsive. Again, one, you could have multiple countries interfering at the same time. In fact, that's exactly what happens all the time. Two, the intel agents are most likely going to be made to look criminal or at the very least incompetent and violating rules after the IG and Durham reports come out. So then what? So maybe that's a reason that the State Department should be doing their job and listening to the foreign policy from the leadership, which is Trump, their boss, instead of saying, we're going to rely on the intel agents. Because maybe you didn't know they were inept or corrupt. Or what's most likely is maybe you did know they were. And that was the reason for your insubordination. That was your reason for leaking and damaging Trump and what this coup attempt's about now. So I'm told over and over. Well, if Ukraine actually did interfere in the election, then the intel agencies would have said something. That's ridiculous. Would you say the same thing about arming Fidel Castro or arming bin Laden in the 70s when we armed bin Laden? They called themselves the Mujahideen then, before they were the Taliban. Would you say the same thing about WMDs in Iraq? That's it? We just unquestionably listen to the intel agents? That's what you're going to say? That's what the Democrats, that's the hill they're going to die on? Just so we know. I hope you're not a Tulsi fan, right? Because all it takes the intel agencies to go, oh, what's that? Tulsi talked to Assad? Yeah, she's out. She's a spy. See ya. How is it that these Democrats can't see 3 feet in front of their face? They don't realize that once this blueprint's successful against Trump, it'll be used against any anti-war candidate that ever comes on the left? Oh, you got a problem with the war in Russia? Oh, you must be a Russian stooge. Some drunk person in your campaign talked to an Australian diplomat and said he heard something about Russia, so that's it for you. You can't see that? You can't see that far ahead to understand? We didn't have to wait, and they did it to Tulsi. Of course, she's an incredible hypocrite. She wants impeachment investigations into Trump from the same lying warmongers that lie about her, lying about Trump. When they do it to her, she goes, I demand an apology. It's not fair. These people are liars. Then when it's Trump, oh yeah, he did it. I believe the same people smearing me with the same tape of lies. When they say it about me, they're terrible and everyone should have sympathy for me. But when they say about Trump, yeah, impeach him. Sorry, Tulsi, hypocrite. But I have to believe that's the claim. I have to believe these intel agents. Okay. So then, what other, I point this out. Dude, the Democrats literally, the State Department literally. And, I'm not going to go through, I wasn't prepared to bring up the documents today. Please check out that last video I did. You can check out my last live stream. I go through the video. At this point, I have it memorized. There were two people, Sitnik and Lyshenko. Sitnik was in charge of the NABU. The NABU, if you haven't heard me talk about it, you have to understand what's going on in the Ukraine. You have this Ukraine's terribly corrupt, everyone says. I haven't personally been there. I'm willing to take that it's probably pretty corrupt. And the reason it's corrupt, it isn't because everyone's like former Soviet bloc country. It's not that. It's not that their people are inherently more corrupt. What it is that it's been a pawn on the world stage for a lot of time. So, ever since the Cold War, you've had all these countries that are kind of acted as proxies for either the United States or Russia. Ukraine being right near Russia is one that's most known. So, it was a big supporter of Russia, but probably kind of a vassal or puppet state to Russia. I'm willing to believe that. I don't have any particular knowledge of this. It just intuitively makes sense. So, I believe that Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president, was probably kowtowing to Putin, and I believe most Ukrainian people probably didn't like that. Just like I wouldn't like if my country's really just a shadow government, which it basically is for deep state interests, but for another country. I wouldn't like that. Okay, fair enough. So they oust Yanukovych. They bring in, it was called the Revolution of Dignity or something stupid like that. Now, no doubt what you're not told is the United States was instrumental in helping provide aid for that coup. Why? Because that's a big win for our deep state. They don't like Russia. So if we could turn an ally of Russia on their border into an enemy of Russia, that's great. So they installed this new president, Poroshenko. The problem is there's still a lot of strife going on. Russia's right there. And so in order for the new pro-US government to exist under Poroshenko, we had to give a bunch of aid, including the $1 billion in loans that you heard Biden threaten to withhold. Part of the condition of getting that aid was ousting corruption, because there were a lot of hangers-ons from the previous administration. And I'm sure those people were corrupt, okay. So they had to set up something called the NABU, which was an investigative agency that was tasked with rooting out this corruption. It was modeled after our FBI. It was paid for by our State Department. That was one of the preconditions for us sending them more aid. And we've heard, actually, George Kent testified to this. How do you start setting up aid? And he said the first thing we do is work with law enforcement. And then from law enforcement, we go up to the legal system, judges, attorneys, prosecutors, things like that. And then from there, we go to more of the political level. But the way we change and out corruption is the United States and our State Department. You start with law enforcement officials, police, investigators. Then you go to the legal system, judges, lawyers. And then you go to the political system. So the very first thing we did was help them set up this NABU. The NABU would become big allies with Obama. The head of the NABU was this guy named Sitnik. Now, there are reports from former prosecutor Litsenko and many other people that the State Department, under Yovanovitch, but Obama's State Department was constantly telling the NABU and other prosecutors to drop cases into Obama-connected people. I'm not going to get into that again, but just know the NABU had a working relationship with Obama and his State Department. Detrimentally to the point many times. Now, just like I can intuitively guess the people of the Ukraine weren't happy about being puppets of Putin, guess what? They weren't happy about being puppets of Obama either, which is what Poroshenko was. And so who wins the election in 2019? A stand-up comedian who's basically a single-issue candidate. He just says, yeah, everything's ridiculously corrupt. Vote for me. I won't be corrupt. And he wins like 75% of the vote. So the guy that the U.S. backed, that Obama backed to end corruption, apparently the people of the Ukraine didn't buy it. They thought he was corrupt. They thought he was a puppet of Obama and Western interest instead of Eastern interest. You know, guess the new boss, same as the old boss. If you're Ukrainian, what do you care? You just want people to have your interest at heart. I'm with them 100%. That's how I feel about my country. I don't care what party you are. Just look at my interest. Stop, being a government for other countries, which is exactly what Obama was to us. Anyways, getting off track. So, who's the head of the NABU? This guy Sitnik. Now, Lyshenko is a politician. He keeps being told, if you listen to Kent and them testify closely, they don't call him a politician. They say he was a media member. The reason that Kent specifically gives in his testimony why it was okay, because Lyshenko is the one who's going to admit in August of 2016 and then in a Politico 2017. This isn't an opinion. This is quotes from Lyshenko. This is him admitting to mainstream media people, yes, I've released this black ledger. Yes, we're interfering to help Hillary because we don't like the policies of Trump. It's an admission. Right? Part of Kent's defense and these people's defense is, well, he was a journalist. And as a journalist, he has every right to release this information. Well, that's not what they said about Julian Assange, is it? Oh, no. If Assange got leaked dirt from Russians, that was a terrible crime for him. The idea that he was a whistleblower or a journalist, that didn't matter a hoot, did it? But now all of a sudden with Lyshenko, that's supposedly the argument. Well, he was a journalist. Well, he wasn't just a journalist. He was also a politician. A politician who, in his quotes, is admitting, I'm working with the Anti-Corruption Bureau and other politicians because we all support Hillary and we want to intervene to hurt Trump. Right? But George Kent, he spins it, well, he was a journalist. So somehow it was, no. That would be like saying, oh, if Trump intervenes in China's election, no big deal, he's just a game show host. Well, yeah, that's what he used to be, but now he's president of the United States. That's the relevant job. Just like when Lyshenko's acting out to harm Trump and to release dirt about Trump, it's him acting as a politician, not in his former capacity as a journalist. But I digress, not important anyways. So Lyshenko admits it, right? Now, we're supposed to believe that this admission, right, somehow that's not good enough. And I've been told this over and over by people I'm discussing this with. It's a conspiracy theory. It's just a conspiracy theory on my part. I'm trying to deflect away from Trump, and this is all just a conspiracy theory. But it's admitted. It's quotes from the people involved. And if that's not enough, a Ukrainian court found Lyshenko, who's the politician, and Sitnik, who's the head of basically their FBI, guilty of interfering in the 2016 election to help Hillary. And they were pissed about this in Ukraine for two reasons. One, because that possibly could damage their relationship with the new president, Trump. And second, because that's them breaking the laws of the Ukraine to act outside of that, to interfere in another country's political affairs. Now listen, I don't know the ins and outs of the Ukrainian legal system, but I'm betting it operates like basically every other legal system in the world, which is any worthwhile legal system, you have investigations, the evidence that is gathered in those investigations isn't made public for the public to consume until the trial. And then if you feel there's enough evidence to warrant filing a charge, you do it, and then you present the evidence at a trial. What you don't do is, in the process of gathering evidence, give that evidence to the media or to a country's political party outside of your country because you want to score political points. Now you've jeopardized the actual investigation. So we have a Ukrainian court admitting they did it. We have their own words admitting they did it. And yet there's George Kent admitting, yes, I told them, for example, he says about Sitnik, he says, we told them that we thought that any looking at the NABU, particularly an investigation into Sitnik, would jeopardize our anti-corruption cooperation. Now remember, the allegation is Trump issued bribery. Trump issued a quid pro quo. And people like me and you will say, where? Read the transcript. And they'll say, oh, he didn't literally say it, but it was implied. If you read between the lines, it was implied. Well, where? Trump never mentions javelins. He never mentions giving foreign aid. We know that the Ukrainian president didn't even know that the aid was being withheld. So where is this implication? I don't see it. Oh, he talks about your country's doing well, and then he says, by the way, you should, he mentions Biden's name. So that proves it. Meanwhile, with the State Department, with people like Kent and Yovanovitch, who, by the way, are the witnesses against Trump, remember, George Kent testifies that he said, you can't investigate Sitnik or it'll jeopardize our cooperation with you. And what was our cooperation with them? Well, sending them billions of dollars. Now, if Trump's statement warrants an investigation, why doesn't Kent's? But not only isn't there an investigation, and Kent says it was him and others at the State Department, who was the ambassador of the State Department? Yovanovitch. Remember? It was all lies. Should I be fired? Lutsenko, the prosecutor that said I gave him a do not prosecute list, he's corrupt, he's a liar. Oh, my life's been damaged so much because Trump fired me. Do you have evidence he committed a crime? No. Were you even there when any of his interactions with Zelensky happened? No. But I was fired and it's not right. I didn't do anything wrong. Shame on the Republicans. I don't know if they're sitting on this to bring it up later or not, but they should have asked her right to her face. You just said George Kent's reliable, he's a friend of yours, right? Yep. Okay, George Kent admits when it comes to the investigation of Sitnik, the leader of the NABU, who a Ukrainian court found guilty of interfering in the 2016 election to help Hillary, that the State Department, which you were at the head of, said that if they continued the investigation into Sitnik, it would jeopardize our cooperation with their anti-corruption efforts. Did you say that? Were you aware that people at the State Department said that? Now, if George Kent and Taylor and Yovanovitch and Fiona Hill and Vindman had such a problem, what did they say? What did Taylor say repeatedly? I can't understand why someone in the executive branch would be concerned about domestic investigations in a foreign country, let alone condition aid on it. That's what Taylor testified to. But meanwhile, we know that that's exactly what State Department officials were doing. So the same State Department officials that have a problem with Trump getting involved in possible investigations in the Ukraine were themselves getting involved in possible investigations in the Ukraine. Another example of the very thing the Democrats accuse Trump of, that's what they're actually doing. Now, if you're George Kent or Kovanovich, you're kind of a little nervous that all of a sudden Trump wants to investigate what's going on in the Ukraine, right? Because let's say, for example, leave Biden out of it for a second, but let's say Zelensky goes, yeah, you know what, Mr. Trump, we will investigate corruption, including 2016 election interference coming from the Ukraine. And let's say Zelensky, who's now new, starts to look at this, what the previous Ukrainian court looked at. And he says, holy cow, here's this guy Lyshenko admitting in U.S. mainstream media, admitting in our media here, that he released this black ledger to help Hillary Clinton. And so he calls up Trump and goes, yeah, I got the evidence. There was election interference. How did you guys miss this? It was announced in your mainstream media. And Trump says, thank you. Were you willing to testify to Mr. Barr and have witnesses cooperate? Sure. And then in the course of that investigation, not only might the American people be a little peeved to know that their media and their intel agencies and their State Department and their Democrats that for 3 years told them that foreign election interference was the biggest possible deal. Not only are they going to be a little peeved that they buried this for 3 years, but maybe they're going to be even more upset to find out that the State Department himself, Yovanovitch, George Kent, actually were instrumental in making sure that the public didn't see this story. Maybe that looks real bad for a career State Department official like George Kent or Yovanovitch. So they're not interested in Trump having any sort of investigation in Ukraine. They already buried it once. It's clear they didn't want this information coming out. Now, a further investigation might just show, holy cow, you mean State Department officials were actually telling Ukrainians not to investigate foreign election interference? That's an epic scandal. That's just that part of it. That's not even talking about money that Obama was giving to activist organizations in Ukraine in conjunction with George Soros. And then sending his State Department to tell prosecutors, you cannot investigate this corruption. Again, George Kent admitted it. George Kent, if you go and watch my video, he signed a letter where he specifically tells these Ukrainians, don't investigate the Anti-Corruption Action Center. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Now, how is that acceptable? Think about the implications of this. The very people that would themselves be investigated for doing the very thing they're accusing Trump of are now vocally speaking out saying, well, we think what Trump's doing is bad. You did it. Now, you might be saying, let's slam dunk case, right? So that means Yovanovitch lied. Here, let me just read some of the... Right? There's this prosecutor. His name's Litsenko. Litsenko was the prosecutor. Here's another thing you'll notice about this entire impeachment crap, right? They'll constantly... Every time a prosecutor or anyone in the Ukraine says anything negative or anything against the narrative of the Democrats or the intel agency or the media, all of a sudden they're a corrupt prosecutor. We can't trust a word they say. Now, Litsenko, for example, I've been reading the John Solomon reporting. And John Solomon reported from like April of last year that he personally interviewed Litsenko. There's actually a video of it you could watch. Now, there's an interpreter being used. But Litsenko told Solomon he was personally given by Yovanovitch a do not prosecute list, right? Now, I saw media story after media story after media story. The Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, ABC, all of these places said, what did they say over and over? Oh, Litsenko recanted that. He recanted that. He said there never was a do not prosecute list. I did a video months ago where I said, it's so funny with Litsenko. What it is on one hand, when Litsenko's saying anything that the media doesn't like, they say, you can't trust this guy. But then, all of a sudden, when Litsenko supposedly recanted, they said, oh, even the prosecutor recanted. I said, wait a minute, didn't you just say you can't trust this guy? Well, he's trustworthy when he's saying what we like. Joe Biden, in the famous speech, right, where he admits to extorting the Ukraine with $1 billion. You know that speech in front of the Council on Foreign Relations. The last thing he says, if you go back and look at that transcript, was they appointed a new prosecutor who was a solid guy. So he thought Lutsenko was solid. Now, Yukановich said over and over Lutsenko was corrupt. Did you hear her say once what he did? Everyone says Lutsenko's corrupt. Now, Shokin was the previous prosecutor. And he was supposedly corrupt because he wouldn't go after Burisma. The media story is that Biden and Obama were upset that this prosecutor wasn't investigating Joe Biden's son's company hard enough. That's their official story. That's what we're supposed to believe. So Shokin was corrupt. We got him out. Then they put a new prosecutor in, and he was corrupt, supposedly. This was a prosecutor that was appointed by Poroshenko. So their puppet, the president of Ukraine, that they helped install, appoints this prosecutor, and they say, no, we're not happy with that prosecutor either, after they said he was a solid guy. But they haven't talked about the details. As far as I've been able to see, the only thing I've been able to find that is a possible alleged corruption in Lutsenko is recently he's being investigated for supposedly being involved in some gambling ring. I don't see how that's important whatsoever to any of his other investigations, but that's what they're tacking on. So all of a sudden he's corrupt. Well, the problem is, as Solomon had been reporting the whole time, Lutsenko never did recant. The problem was a colloquialism. Now, I'm no linguist, but different cultures and languages have expressions that don't make sense literally. So let me give you an example. I could eat a horse right now. That just means you're really hungry. That doesn't mean you're literally saying I would eat a horse if it was here. Lutsenko said, when he said I was given a list of names, he didn't mean he was given a list like that said, Sarah, Samantha, John, Timothy. Don't prosecute these people. He's just saying, she told me names of people not to prosecute. So when he's interviewed and they say, well, can we see the list? And he's like, well, there wasn't a list. Everyone's like, oh, he recanted. He recanted. And later then, and Solomon reported this out, no one actually, he just interviewed with one media agency or whatever, or journalist in the Ukraine. Yet everyone in the United States, all the mainstream media, because they're not journalists anymore. They're just mouthpieces for the establishment left. They just ran with the story. They didn't bother to call Lutsenko. Right? So they just took it at face value. Oh, Lutsenko recanted. Well, the New York Times actually interviewed Lutsenko last month. And of course, they're biased, so if you read their reporting on it from like last Wednesday, I think, it's all done in John Solomon's terrible, he's terrible, he's terrible. But if you actually read, and this is often the times with the mainstream media, most of the time the truth's in there. They give the facts, it's just that they spin them. And the spin is garbage. So after all the spin, when you really get down to it, they say, oh, Lutsenko recanted. And then we interviewed Lutsenko, and he said that there was no list, that actually it just was a mistake with his interpreter. But, and here's the relevant part. Let me read this. In fact, I'll just read it verbatim. Why? Quote from the New York Times. In an interview with the New York Times last month, Mr. Lutsenko blamed the confusion on the interpreter who handled his interview with The Hill. But he insisted that the ambassador, Mary Yovanovitch, had in fact asked him not to target certain politician and activists who worked with the embassy on its anti-corruption efforts. Now we know that's true. Why? Because George Kent said, let me see if I can bring up the article and read it. This is from a letter from George Kent. Sorry, my internet kind of... Who's this signed by? That's George Kent's signature. What's he saying here? I'll just start here. The investigation into the actions of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, based on the assistance they have received from us, is similarly misplaced. As voiced by the European Union Ambassador Jan Tabinski, we are gravely concerned about this investigation, for which we see no basis and which appears to us to be an attempt to intimidate those in the Prosecutor General's office most committed to combating corruption, as well as non-governmental partners and outspoken anti-corruption activists. Okay, so that's George Kent admitting, yes, we did pressure them to drop an investigation in the Anti-Corruption Action Center. Who financed the Anti-Corruption Action Center? Soros, Obama's State Department. Now, what was Litsenko's charge? I was told by Kihlanovich and people at State Department not to investigate people connected to the Obama administration that were allegedly in anti-corruption groups. That's admitted. We could see it from that letter from George Kent. The media, to this day, the people I talk to this day are saying, that's a conspiracy theory. Now, if they're so blind, if people are so blind or so unwilling to admit the truth, that when we have an official state document from George Kent, when we have his own words and testimony admitting, yes, we did do this, and people say, nah, that's a lie, that's a conspiracy theory. What else did George Kent say? Might as well go through this. This is exactly what he said for Sitnik. Quote, more recently, George Kent, the NBC's charge d'affaires in 2016 and now a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, confirmed in impeachment testimony that he personally signed the April 2016 letter demanding Ukraine drop the case against the Anti-Corruption Action Center. That's the letter I just showed you. He also testified he was aware of pressure the U.S. Embassy also applied on Ukraine prosecutors to drop investigations against a journalist named Vitaly Shabunin, a parliamentary member named Sergei Lyshenko, and a senior law enforcement official named Artem Sitnik. As for Sitnik, the head of the NABU anti-corruption police, Kent added, we warned both Lyshenko and others that efforts to destroy the NABU as an organization, including opening up investigations of Sitnik, threatened to unravel a key component of our anti-corruption cooperation. We warned Lyshenko investigating Sitnik threatened to unravel our cooperation. That's what he just said. Now I'm told by the media, I'm told by the Democrats, that's a lie. That when John Solomon reported that, it's a lie. When Rudy Giuliani talked about that, it was a lie. That's what Yovanovitch just testified to. But George Kent testified, another one of their witnesses, that it's the truth. And he actually provided documents to show it. He's just saying, well, it was okay for us to do this. That's what Yovanovitch is going to say. Because if you listen carefully to her opening testimony, she said, oh, no, I never told anyone in the Ukraine that they had to drop any investigation. What I did was speak to them about our suggestions for anti-corruption efforts. In other words, she didn't say, look, you have to stop investigating this person. And that's why she's saying Lyshenko's lying. What she said was, we're heavily against this investigation. And if you keep going with the investigation, then maybe you're going to lose our cooperation. Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that exactly what they're accusing Trump of doing and saying so terrible? Even though we don't have any proof that that's what Trump was doing. But we have to just believe, one, it didn't happen, and then once you prove it did happen, all the media people and stuff say, well, it was okay. They should have been doing it. They were just trying to fight corruption. It just so happens that every investigation they were telling Ukrainian prosecutors to drop were ones that would make the Democrats look bad. So we couldn't investigate Sitnik for interfering in the 2016 election, or Lyshenko, because foreign election interference isn't a big deal. But we needed a 3-year investigation into Trump based on foreign election interference. But when Ukrainians did it, it was a good thing. And it was okay for our State Department to squash that investigation. Now, don't you think we should have left it up to the American people? If we were sold that a special counsel was needed in Bob Mueller to investigate Trump and people connected to Trump because that's how serious election interference was, I think the American people should have had a say in, by the way, the Ukrainians also interfered to help Hillary, and the State Department quashed that investigation. Oh, well, if that's what the State Department did. So here's the defense of it. Since I put this up, one, the best defense is to ignore it, and that's what happens. And again, I don't know why the Republicans didn't bring this up. I don't know if they thought that attacking Kekanovich would mean that they didn't seem sympathetic, just like how they did with Christine Blasey Ford. Instead of pointing out the holes in her story and going after what she was saying, they treated her like with special kid gloves. Maybe that's what they're doing with Kekanovich. Maybe they're going to bring this up later. I don't know. But they were wrong not to. And so meanwhile, John Solomon was right about all this. Has anyone answered John Solomon's accusations? No. They just say he's terrible. Solomon's terrible. Solomon's terrible. In fact, The Hill, where he used to work, came out. First, they made him switch his title from investigative reporter to opinion writer. And now they're saying, we're fact-checking what's going on. Since Yukановich said he lied, we're going to check out his reporting. Okay. Shouldn't you be doing that anyways? Shouldn't you be doing that with the Washington Post reporting and the New York Times reporting and all the people that fell for the Russia hoax? But no, just this month. That's fine. Solomon tweeted out, great. My story is accurate. He backs it up with actual facts. Now, someone's lying here. And like I said, Yukановich and Kent will say, well, we didn't lie. We didn't say they had to drop the investigation. And we were doing it for good reasons. You see how that theme, you see that motif running through over and over again? The Democrats and the intel people and the State Department people do the exact same thing they accuse Trump of. Biden did the exact same thing they're accusing Trump of. 3 Democratic senators, Leahy, Durbin, and Menendez, they wrote a letter to the Ukraine doing the exact same thing they're accusing Trump of. But their motivations were all pure. It was all good. We don't need an investigation because the media says it was all good. And the intel people say it was all good. And the Democrats say it was all good. So therefore, it's all good. No investigation needed. Now, those same people know that Trump's motivation, wanting to look into them, was not good. And therefore, he needs to be impeached. Now, you keep hearing about all these polls, right? Oh, 50, I heard Juan Williams on the 5 Today talking about it. 53% of people think that not only should Trump be impeached, but he should be removed from office. That's a huge story. Yeah, because the media and the academics and the entertainment industry in Silicon Valley control the conversation. How many people are hearing the truth? Yukановich, she comes off, she seemed very credible, and that tugs at the heartstrings of Americans. Well, how many people know that the witness right before her basically admitted that she did do what she was accused of? How many Americans know that Ukrainians admitted to interfering in our election? How many Americans know that the State Department forced the Ukraine itself to stop looking into that investigation? So not only did our intelligence community not investigate Ukrainian election interference, not only did the State Department not investigate it, but the only place investigating it was Ukraine. The pro-Obama Poroshenko administration. That's who was investigating it before Zelensky was even elected. Our investigative agencies are so corrupt, they won't even investigate it. So it took the Ukraine to investigate it. And what happened? Our unelected bureaucrats went to the Ukraine and said, stop it. How dare you? You can't point out corruption that helped Hillary. So I was told it's a lie. Biggest story. The biggest story in the country right now. The biggest story. Why is it so big? Because it doesn't take a genius to figure out. One of the problems with the Democrats and the media and all of their narrative over and over again is anytime you could show when they're dealing in some sort of corruption, they'll twist things around. They could, oh, it's not a big deal because X, Y, Z, blah, 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 right? When they have emphatically said for 3 years, foreign election interference is the biggest deal ever. We need never-ending investigations to get to the bottom of it. And then you have their own witnesses admitting, yes, we basically threatened to end cooperation with Ukraine unless they stopped an investigation into Ukrainians that meddled into our 2016 election to help Hillary. If you're highlighting that story, you put the Democrats and the media in a difficult position because they now have to, in front of the American people, argue one of 3 things. 1, George Kent, their star witness, is a liar. 2, that yes, they did pressure the Ukraine to drop that investigation, but that was fine. That election interference is no big deal. Or 3, that all the Ukraine They're all liars. The people that admitted it are liars. Lyshenko's a liar when he said we did it. Sitnik's a liar when he admitted that they interfered. It's a very difficult position. That's how the Republicans could be going on offense, but they're not. So that's the defense. And then all of a sudden, Yovanovitch and Kent and Taylor and all the people I'm arguing with online that go, well, if there really was election interference from Ukraine, then clearly the intel community would have investigated it. You would think that, wouldn't you? So if I could prove there is election interference and the intel agencies didn't investigate it, I know you're going to try to spin that as, oh, that proves it wasn't serious. But maybe the answer is that's more evidence that the intel community and their claims that we need to investigate foreign election interference is a lie. And in reality, what they were saying is, we need to take down Trump. Which is exactly what the case is. So the next thing when I bring this up to people, they ignore it. They default to, appeals to authority. It was all okay, or else the intel community would have said something. And then they go with the Fiona Hill response. So this might be the best of the defenses of this. They'll say, okay, but Manafort was corrupt. So what if Ukrainians outed that Manafort was corrupt? Right? That's fine. Manafort was corrupt. Ukrainians, they released information showing Manafort was corrupt. Therefore, it's okay. So just to give a little background to this, what happened with this so-called black ledger, the information that was within it was never used by the United States to prosecute Manafort for any crimes. He was prosecuted for totally different things. It was just used to apply public pressure to force Manafort to resign, which then started an investigation into him, which then they found evidence of other crimes like failing to register as a foreign lobbyist in 2013, etc. Ukraine dropped its investigation that it was using this black ledger for. Remember, who was running the investigation? The NABU. The same agency that we know interfered. The same agency that we know got the Hunter Biden case, the Burisma case, and buried it. Right? That same agency that was funded and started by the Obama State Department and worked to bury cases for them in the past. That NABU. That's who we're talking about here. So they got the investigation, and they were the ones that were interfering. As soon as the election ended, all of a sudden they dropped their investigation into Manafort, which led to politicians that had a problem with this saying, we don't even have proof that any of that evidence in the black ledger was correct. It could have been forged. No one knows. Investigation closed. So the idea of, that was legitimate evidence that needed to be out there. We don't even know that that was true evidence. That's just an aside. Let's, for the sake of argument, say it was true. What the Democrat and the media and the people I'm talking to's response that are okay with this then, here's what they're really saying. Who cares if Ukraine interfered in this way? The evidence they released was truthful, and therefore that's okay. It's not a big deal. But wait a minute. Wasn't all the evidence WikiLeaks released truthful as well? I don't remember one Democrat or one media person or one intel person saying, hey, if Russia released a bunch of emails that shows that the Democrats are a bunch of jerks and they're treating Bernie like crap and they're doing a bunch of shady stuff, that's all true. So, no harm, no foul from the Russians. I don't recall hearing that at all. Now, all of a sudden, if the information that was released was truthful, then it's not interference or it's not worth investigating. Boy, that's a new one on me. Or, conversely, here's the other place, the way they'll play it. They'll say, well, it's not even that big of a deal. Trump himself admitted, right? Trump came out after Manafort left the campaign. I literally saw someone say this. He came out after Manafort left the campaign and he said, actually, Manafort wasn't that important to me. So that proves that this election interference wasn't a big deal. Of course, that's what Trump's going to say. What do you expect him to say? In the middle of a presidential race. Oh, I'm devastated. I just lost my campaign manager. The whole media is spinning the team around me as corrupt now. Of course he's going to downplay it. How is that evident? Well, Trump said it wasn't a big deal, then no big deal. No, he never said the election interference wasn't a big deal. He said Manafort moving on wasn't a big deal. But, okay, that's the standard now? As long as it wasn't a big deal. I mean, it was just... First off, let's not downplay exactly what happened, okay? It did force his campaign manager out. It did give Hillary Clinton and the media talking points to go after Trump by surrounding himself with corrupt people. That happened. Okay? Now again, we see the double standard and the hypocrisy though. Because I was told, and am still told to this day, once a day if I'm arguing with people about this, at some point someone will bring this up. They'll be like, oh yeah? You think Trump's innocent? You don't think Trump did anything wrong? Need I remind you how many people were indicted by the Mueller report? Need I remind you every one of those corrupt people that were indicted? What, like 12 Russian trolls? So now I'm to believe that 12 people with no connection to Vladimir Putin that put mean jokes and memes on Facebook, that's a serious deal. We had to have meetings on Capitol Hill. We had to talk about getting rid of fake news off of the internet for that. We had to charge those people knowing they'd never be extradited here. Right? All of that. We had to do all of that. But a Ukrainian politician and the head of their anti-corruption investigative bureau admitting in public in the mainstream media that they're interfering to help Hillary Clinton because they don't like the policies of Donald Trump, forcing his campaign manager to be fired, that's no big deal. Boy, I guess if Lyshenko or Sitnik would have posted some mean memes, then all of a sudden the Democrats and the media would be concerned, right? I mean, does anyone believe this crap? It's nonsense. I told people with this Russia troll business, I told reasonable Democrats that were telling me how big of a deal it was. I'm like, this is going to come back to bite you in the butt. Because it's not a big deal, and you know it's not. And if you say this is a huge deal, that means anytime some foreign country does any little thing, all of a sudden that's tantamount to election interference. No. We'd be consistent, we're consistent. Countries interfere like that. Okay, what about this situation in Ukraine? Oh, that's no big deal. Now notice, everything I just said here. Did I mention the name Alexandra Chalupa once? Did I mention the DNC working with Ukraine once? Nope, not once. Everything I've said about how corrupt this is without even having to tie that piece of it in. And you know how I know that? Did the Mueller report, after 3 years of investigating, was there one person connected to Trump? Heck, was there one American charged with illegally colluding with Russia to affect the 2016 election? Nope. Now, did the media and the intel community and the Democrats, did they say, oh, I guess it wasn't a big deal then? No. They said, oh, the Mueller investigation was hugely important. Getting to the bottom of Russian interference was incredibly important. And anything Trump did against that was obstruction of justice. Now all of a sudden people are trying to tell me this is the third defense. Well, this story about Alexandra Chalupa and the DNC being involved, you have no proof of that. And if the DNC wasn't soliciting the dirt, then it's not a big deal and there's no reason to investigate. But that's not what you said about the Russian situation. And there is evidence that Chalupa's own words was, she was in the Ukraine talking to officials to see what was going on. She now disputes whether or not she was facilitating dirt. But there's certainly enough there to warrant bringing her in to question it and to have an investigation. We have more evidence that the DNC and she colluded with Ukraine to get dirt than we ever had about Don Jr. at Trump Tower. Yet that required an investigation and people said he should be in prison for treason. Now all of a sudden, when we know an admission that a Ukrainian politician and leader of their law enforcement is admitting, yes, we're leaking information to harm Donald Trump. When we have a DNC operative saying, yes, I went to the Ukraine, I talked to Ukrainian embassy officials to try to get facilitated to talk with people, and then this dirt was released. Remember, the Trump Tower meeting, no dirt was ever released, no dirt was ever obtained. He just was willing to talk to someone that said, I have dirt. Okay. I argued from the get-go. I didn't think that was a crime. By the way, I don't think what Alexandra Chalupa is accused of doing is a crime. I don't give a rat's behind. You want to talk and try to get dirt? That's fine. Now, If you say, if you make up dirt, that's different. Or if you say, if you give us the dirt, then we'll have a favorable policy to you, that's different. But I don't care if Trump or Obama or Clinton or Mitt Romney, if they want to talk to Russians or Chinese people and say, hey, you got evidence Hillary Clinton's committed crimes? Yeah, let's hear them. How do we know if you get that evidence Hillary committed a crime, you wouldn't take that evidence to the authorities and say, my God, here's proof Hillary committed some crime? That's what Adam Schiff claims he was doing when he tried to get nude photos from Russians about Trump. But that was okay for some reason. But Trump Jr. trying to talk to a Russian and get supposed dirt on Hillary, that wasn't okay. Can you follow this yet? These are the standards that the Democrats have set. Standards that I thought were absurd from the get-go. I didn't want a 3-year investigation into this. But they did. And they spent 3 years telling us all how important it was and how we needed it to save our country. Now, all of a sudden, as soon as the shoe's on the other foot, not even when Trump... I at least thought, well, once Trump's out of the presidency, this will come back to bite the Democrats. We're actually seeing it during his first term. The exact same things they accused Trump of. They did. Now they're telling us, oh, it's not a big deal. The same people. The same people that foamed at the mouth night after night. The Rachel Maddows, the Anderson Coopers, the Don Lemons, the Max Boots, these Intel people, the Brennans, the Clampers. They foamed at the mouth every night. Oh my God, foreign interference, it's such a big deal. Now all of a sudden, they're saying, oh, interference that helped Hillary. Not only is it not a big deal, but to investigate it would be criminal, and Trump should be impeached for wanting to investigate it. And the last thing I'm told is, it's just a conspiracy theory. It's just a conspiracy theory. I had people that I consider respectable, intelligent people on the left that don't like Trump, but that's fine. When I would report something like I report the Financial Times article or the Politico article with actual quotes from Sergei Leshchenko saying, yes, we interfered in the election. The response I was giving, these are just opinion pieces. And then once one person says that, then here comes a host of people. Yep, just opinion piece. Write it off, it's opinion piece. Write it off, it's an opinion piece. First off, even if something's an opinion piece, that doesn't mean there can't be factual things in it. For example, let's say I'm an opinion writer for CNN, and I say, the Dow Jones has gone up 200 points last week. And my reasoning for that is, I think it's because Trump's corrupt and he's working with the Russians to do X, Y, Z. Now, the opinion piece of that as an opinion writer is me saying, this is why I think that happened. Here's my opinion, right? But that doesn't mean the verifiable fact that the Dow Jones went up 250 points should not be looked at. You could say, my opinion on it's just my opinion. But if I'm citing quotes or actual facts, in the same token, if I write an opinion piece and I say, here's a man named Sergei Leshchenko, and here's a quote that he told me. I interfered in the election. It's not that simple, but let's say that's what he said. And I say, but I think it was okay that he interfered in the election because X, Y, Z. Now, my opinions are, I think it's okay. My opinion isn't his quote. That's not an opinion. That's fact. Unless you could prove or you're alleging that quote was never said, but that's not what anyone's doing. They're just saying, the whole piece is opinion, so we can't look at any of it. That's ridiculous. And that's true outside of this impeachment case. I'm sick and tired of that. And by the way, I've seen right-wing people do this as well. If your defense against any kind of allegation is, well, that source sucks, so you're not doing a good job. There are times to say that. For example, if CNN points out a piece and it says, according to an anonymous source, Trump's a stooge of Putin. Now, we know that CNN doesn't have any credibility, so I'm not going to believe that. Who's the anonymous source? Show me something more substantial. Now, if CNN says, here's a video of General Mattis saying that Trump is screwing up in his Russian policy, I'm not going to say, oh, that's CNN, so that must be a lie. They're linking the video of Mattis, or they're linking the quote of Mattis. If CNN says, we have court documents signed by Trump's, signed by Flynn's lawyer that says X, and they link the court document, and it's evident that it's a real court document, and it's national news for weeks, and no one's alleging that that court document's not true, I'm not going to say, oh, it's CNN, so that court document must not be true. Every one of those examples I just gave you is exactly what people do when I bring up this information. Every single one. And then you want to hear the coup de grace, the little cherry on top? It turns out the Financial Times article, the Political article that they're saying, we can't even look at the quotes because these are opinion pieces. It turns out they're not even opinion pieces. They're from the straight news desks. But no one bothered to check. 6 people just repeated it because that was a convenient way to fit their narrative. Oh, thank God, I don't have to deal with any of this. Here was a bunch of facts that disrupted my narrative. But if it's all opinion, whoop, okay. One person said it, we'll just all agree with them. Now moving on. We can brush that to the side. But it's not an opinion. So then they have to argue, well, yeah, it actually is an opinion because even though it doesn't say opinion piece, it really is an opinion. Okay, so can you give me an example of a straight news that's not an opinion? If I can't even take quotes or actual legal documents, if you say, no, that's still an opinion, please give me an example of a media source you would use that's not opinion then. That's what I hear over and over. John Solomon, who does a lot of this reporting. Oh, he sucks. People at the Hill didn't like. All these mainstream media outlets release reports saying how crappy he is. Yes, but they don't debunk anything he actually said. They just say he's a conspiracy theory. He worked with Rudy Giuliani. Some people, he talks to Sean Hannity. That's not an argument. That's not disproving anything he says. When he says, I have a court document from Viktor Shokin, the fired prosecutor, saying that Poroshenko basically told him the reason you're being fired is because Biden wants the investigation into his son's company dropped. Now, you could say, well, Shokin's corrupt, so I'm not going to believe this. He's lying. Okay, fine, whatever. That's your right to say it. But the response I'm getting is, prove that's a real court document. Are you kidding me? John Solomon's just terrible. He lies about everything. Okay, what is wrong? Can you show me in this article what you feel he's lying about? George Kent never said that. Okay, here, George Kent never said that. No, George Kent would have never said anything like that. That's garbage. He never, that letter, there's no letter from George Kent. It's all a lie. That's all. Here's what I stole. Solomon, if Solomon's telling the truth, how come everything he links is just his own opinion sources? You saw me link that George Kent letter, right? Now, prove that's real. Prove it's a real letter. Okay, well, here's George Kent's testimony. It's not even linked from Solomon. Who's admitting, yes, that April 2016 letter is me. I did sign that. Yeah, prove that's real. How do you know the transcript's real? So you're a nihilist. You just don't believe anything. Unless you're physically in the room when it happens, then it's not worth talking about. But wait a minute. We can go over here and you're citing CNN verbatim. You're citing the New York Times verbatim. Isn't that interesting how that works? What are the things they've said Solomon's wrong about? Well, Litsenko recanted, so throw everything Solomon said out. No, he didn't. As I proved to you, the New York Times even said. What has he been wrong about? Nothing. No one even addresses any of the evidence he said. He says, for example, he said, Hunter Biden got all this money. People said for months, you're lying. Now we know that's true. Official documents have been released showing he got $83,333 a month. That's true. It was said a lie. He said the prosecutor Litsenko said he was pressured to not prosecute certain people. Everybody said that was a lie. That's true. The New York Times has confirmed it. So what exactly has he lied about? And just as a side note on this, right? I find it hilarious. Now, you won't see me doing this. If someone says, here's a CNN article that proves Trump's corrupt, I'll read the article. I almost never default to the lazy, this is CNN, they're obviously garbage, I'm not going to read it. I can't recall a time I've ever done that. I might get into the piece and say, they don't even have any sources. So this is just what? Them saying this is how they feel? I need to see something more than that. But I'd say the same about Sean Hannity or someone defending the president. But I find it a little rich, right? And just a little hypocritical and hilariously ironic that the same people, the same ones that will jump all over me or jump all over anyone who wants to cite a source, whether it be Solomon, or maybe you want to talk about Alex Jones, or maybe you want to talk about Laura Loomer, right? Or Sean Hannity, or Rush Limbaugh, right? I don't care who, right? Anyone. Ranging from the super conspiratorial David Icke, Alex Jones, to the super conservative, Ben Shapiro, Rush Limbaugh. And they'll say, the source. Nope, you're not going to watch that. That's just a garbage source. It's just a garbage source. They'll then say, I'll say, oh, what source would you look for? What source can I present to you that you would say, okay, this is an acceptable source? Well, mainstream, NBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post. Now, there's two lines of argumentation here. I'll give the least important one first. The first is, but they've been wrong over and over again. I mean, we've all seen the examples. Remember when Putin hacked the electric grid? Remember when Don Jr. was admitted talking about WikiLeaks 3 days before it was public knowledge, only to find out they got the date wrong, and Don Jr. was talking about it after Anderson Cooper had been talking about it, etc. Over and over, they're wrong. Just 2 weeks ago, they said Morrison was going to testify that Trump issued a quid pro quo. He testified to the exact opposite. So they're wrong over and over again. So it's hilarious. Anytime the mainstream media is wrong, they're like, people make mistakes, no big deal. Of course, the mistakes always go in one direction against Trump. But on the other hand, if you want to use a source they don't like, they say, it's always wrong. You can't say that. Well, yeah, everyone makes a mistake. Nah, it's a crap outlet. But here's the better point. And here's what I really want to talk about when it comes to sources. Now, Alex Jones might be over-sensationalist, right? And John Solomon might be partisan and biased. I haven't seen anything John Solomon's reported that's been inaccurate, by the way. But Laura Loomer or Alex Jones or David Icke or Conservative Treehouse or True Pundit, whatever. They could be conspiratorial. They could be wrong all the time. Let's just take Alex Jones. It'll be easiest to do it, okay? Yeah. There are things Alex Jones has said that are just patently wrong. There are things he's over-sensationalized, right? Like, that's all true. And I get criticizing him. And I'm certainly not going to, if Alex Jones reports something and says, we got to report that soul-sucking vampire aliens are controlling Hillary Clinton's campaign. I'm not going to be like, well, that's proof, right? That's not what I'm going to do. But I'll tell you this much. You say what you want about Alex Jones. I don't recall ever finding proof that he intentionally buried a story to protect a child sex trafficker because he was afraid that it would hurt his political allies. That's what we know about ABC now, isn't it? And notice how the rest of the mainstream outlets, they didn't report their outrage about that, did they? Nope, they didn't care at all. So ABC protecting a child sex trafficker because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to talk to the royal family, or they were afraid it would hurt Hillary Clinton, which could have, in the real world, stopped Epstein from molesting or sexually assaulting more children if he'd have been outed sooner. The same people telling me, well, any source that I provide is wrong, and so I should provide their preferred sources. I'll take the people that are wrong and that are sensationalists any day over the child sex trafficker protectors. Any day. But what sources would you use? I don't care if you use ABC. Again, like I said, I try to look at any source and sift through opinion and fact. I try to give the benefit of the doubt, and I try not to rely on the crutch, well, this source sucks, so I don't believe anything in it. But the people that do that, the people that say that about anything I oh, John Solomon, he's crap. Dude, you're citing pedophile protectors, okay? So if we're going to judge sources, let's be honest about it, right? It's just nonsense. So that's where we're at. The biggest story in the country right now is being not talked about. I got 4 or 5 people on here listening to me. Sitnik. Being investigated. For interfering in the 2016 election. Here's Lushenko again. For years, Lushenko, this is Financial Times, 2016, August 2016, 2 months before the election, a mainstream media outlet doing an interview with Lushenko. Lyshenko, a top Ukrainian anti-corruption campaigner, worked to expose kleptocracy under Yanukovych. Now he's focused on a new pro-Russian threat to the Ukraine. U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump. The prospect of Trump, who has praised Ukrainians' archenemy Vladimir Putin, becoming leader of the country's biggest ally, has spurred not just Mr. Lyshenko, but Kiev's wider political leadership to do something they would never have attempted before: intervene, however indirectly, in the U.S. election. Lyshenko and Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Bureau published a secret ledger this month that authorities claim show millions of dollars of off-the-book cash payments to Manafort, Mr. Trump's campaign director. Quote from Lyshenko, a Trump presidency would change the pro-Ukrainian agenda in American foreign policy. Mr. Lyshenko said, for me it was important to show not only the corruption aspects, but that he's a pro-Russian candidate who could break the geopolitical balance in the world. Let's admit it. Now, I'm told that's a conspiracy theory. Him admitting that. Or here's the other thing I'm told. That's just me deflecting for Trump. Oh, you hear about what Trump did, and all you want to do is talk about Joe Biden. All you want to do is talk about Ukrainian interference in the election. That's deflecting from Trump. The two are inextricably entwined. Because the allegation into Trump is that he is improperly trying to look into this corruption. If there is evidence to look into, then Trump did nothing wrong. If your argument is, even if this corruption existed, which I've seen a person on the left say this, look, even if you're right that there is, and I agree, there is evidence to look into Joe Biden. That's what this person on the left told me. There is evidence to look into Joe Biden. But still, it was improper for Trump to look into it because that's his opponent. Okay? If that's your argument, then it would also be illegal for Barack Obama and his intel agencies to be looking into crimes of Donald Trump in the 2016 election. No, I don't recall any media or Dem saying, look, even if Trump did collude with the Russians, it can't be the Obama administration investigating. It can't be his intel agency investigating. It can't be. Because that could potentially benefit Obama and the Democrats. Therefore, only Republicans can investigate Trump, and only Democrats can investigate Democrats. I don't recall hearing that at all. No one batted an eye. They told us how important the investigation was. They told us to question the investigation was un-American. If there's a reason to look at Ukrainian election interference, there's no case to impeach Trump. If there's a reason to look into Joe and Hunter Biden's actions, there's no case to impeach Trump. If there's credible evidence that the witnesses against Trump did the very thing they're accusing Trump of doing, i.e. getting involved in pressuring Ukrainian prosecutors to drop investigations into Obama-allied people, including election interference, then they're not credible witnesses. And there needs to be an investigation into that. You remember when O.J. Simpson got arrested because he supposedly stole stuff after he was allowed to walk free from, the murder he committed? He stole stuff from someone, right? He can't make the defense, but wait, after I stole it, other people tried to steal it from me. Therefore, I'm a witness against them. It's illegal to look into my stealing of the stuff from them. Instead, just an investigation of them. So, O.J. Simpson steals $1,000, television from a guy named Jim. Jim comes and steals the TV back. The investigators say, oh yes, OJ, that guy stole a TV from you. You'll be a witness. Jim says, wait a minute. He stole the TV from me. How could you have this guy who was the thief in the first place be the witness against me? Yep. That's not how it works. And that's not even a good analogy. Because we're not accusing Trump of stealing anything. We're accusing someone of investigating something. They have no credibility. Then that's beyond what we already know without any of the testimony. All of them at face value. The very first thing you have to, like Yukonovich, did you hear any evidence of Trump committing any crimes? Nope. Were you even in your position as ambassador when Zelensky was sworn in? Nope. Did you hear any of the preparation of Trump people leading into the phone calls with Zelensky? Nope. Did you hear anything about the calls with Zelensky and Trump? Nope. So why are you here? I feel bad that I was fired. Taylor, why are you here? Well, it actually was a quid pro quo. So you heard Trump said that. You were in the room with Trump when he said that. Well, no, I've never talked to Trump. Okay, so you personally heard someone say, Trump told me this was a quid pro quo. No, actually, when I talked to Sondland, he told me specifically it wasn't a quid pro quo. But one of my staffers claims that he overheard one of Sondland's staffers saying that it was a quid pro quo, basically. So, what about you, George Kent? Nah, I never talked to Trump. Never met him. I just thought it was odd he was getting involved in Ukrainian politics. How about you, Fiona Hill? No, I didn't hear I wasn't there for the phone call. How about you, Vindman? Nah, didn't hear it. So how are we... So aside from all that, so not only is this all just secondhand hearsay, not only are we now finding out that these people actually potentially had a stake in this, and this is the last thing I want to read before I go to bed tonight. Oh man, I don't even know if I have time to get into this. It's 8 pages. We'll skip that. We'll go to that another day. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Everyone's corrupt. I am to this day absolutely astonished that they don't have a better case against Donald Trump. I'm flabbergasted because I still believe this. I don't think Trump's especially corrupt, but I basically believe anyone who's a billionaire or anyone who's involved at the highest level of national politics has some sort of skeleton in their closet. Might not be super heinous, but, you know, they've stashed some money when they shouldn't. They've avoided paying some taxes. They made some kind of underhanded deal where they shouldn't. I just believe that has to be the case for 98% of people. When they literally were able to break in to Trump's lawyer's house in the middle of the night to investigate crimes from decades back, I said that's it. When they got Cohen, I was like, they're going to find evidence of something. And maybe they did, and they're just waiting till it's closer to the election. I don't know. And I've said from the get-go, if Trump committed a crime, that's the law. Hold him accountable. All I want is equal application of the law. That's it. I don't know how many times I've said this. I have great friends that hate Trump, despise Trump. But they're consistent. Not all of them. But I respect the ones that are consistent more. That's why it's important to talk to people and get straightforward answers about what could be potentially criminal or illegal or unethical behavior before they hear the specifics. So, for example, the Mueller report, before it comes out, what do you think the report will say? If it says that Trump didn't collude, will you believe it? Because if you don't get them on record, what happens is the report comes out and they say, well, here's how it fits to my narrative. Some of the most frustrating conversations I've ever had were about these types of issues. For example, and by the way, and let me just say this, you don't get frustrated as much with people you don't respect. So when I did this debate with this guy falling down the other day, it was frustrating, but I just have no respect for him. I mean, he starts off making homophobic slurs to me, and I don't know if he's drunk or if he has mental issues or whatever, but it was just clear he's not in the same class as me. Not to say that I'm super genius, not to say that I couldn't have handled things slightly better, but it just... I mean, how can you take someone seriously when they come on and they're like, oh, were you bobbing up and down your boyfriend last night? Like, that's some It's just nonsense. It's like, okay, whatever. The real people that frustrate you is when people that you respect in some way, when they do stuff, that's what's frustrating you. So there are people that it seems like I despise because they disagree with me and we're always arguing. But some of those people I like more than anyone because they're challenging me. They're sharpening my wit. You know, that's better than just someone agreeing with you. And so I'll talk to some of these people and I'm like, okay, you know, I remember having this conversation in 2017 with someone I consider a smart person from the left online. And I said, listen, you tell me what it is you feel that is reason for an investigation that supposedly Trump or someone connected to him did. You tell me, what is it? And that person says, if you're trying to get dirt on your opponent from a foreign government, particularly a foreign government that we're not exactly allied with, then there needs to be an investigation. I had another person tell me, if you have a bunch of relationships with people connected in Russia, there needs to be an investigation. Okay, that's it? Yeah, that's it. Well, in both of those counts, I can prove that's exactly what the Hillary Clinton campaign did. So as long as you're saying we need to investigate Trump, I assume you're saying we need to investigate Hillary. No. It was okay that Hillary did that. Wait, what? No, it was fine that Hillary did it. The circumstances were different. She paid an intermediary, so that's okay. But you said anytime you're trying to get dirt, you didn't say it's okay to get dirt from Russia on your opponent as long as you pay a lawyer to do it. You didn't say that. You said it was just wrong and unethical and reason for an investigation. Well, what Hillary did was different. Lying to the FBI is always a crime. Okay. Always needs to be investigated and charged. All right. Mills and Aberdeen, I proved to you earlier. I read the emails. They lied. They lied to the FBI. Well, that was different. That wasn't a big lie. And, you know, they'd been given immunity and... Firing ambassadors without a damn good reason is incredibly unethical and should be investigated. Okay, well, Obama fired all of Bush's ambassadors. Well, that was fine. Or my favorite from 2 weeks ago. Withholding congressionally approved money for a favor is extortion, period. And I'm still quoting, I don't care if it was for a mission from God. Okay, Joe Biden withheld congressionally approved money for a favor, the favor of firing the prosecutor looking at his son's company. That's extortion. Therefore, it should be investigated, correct? No, that's different. What do you mean that's different? Well, Joe Biden's intent was a good intent. He was just doing his job. But you said intent didn't matter. You said period. It didn't matter why. If you withheld congressionally approved money, it was wrong, period. Even if it was a mission from God. Well, this is different with Joe Biden. Now, how can you have a serious conversation with someone like that? And again, if it's just some troll, you don't care. But if it's someone you think's a reasonable person worth discussing something with, what do you think about that person then? You're just like, wait, what? Foreign election interference, biggest deal ever. It's an attack on our country. No stone must be left unturned in investigating it. Okay, well, we have this Ukrainian admitting that they interfered in the election. We have a Ukrainian court finding them guilty of interfering in the election. We have an admission from a State Department official admitting that they pressured the Ukraine to stop that investigation. Oh, I don't have a problem with any of that. All I ask for is consistency. If you say any quid pro quo should be illegal, that's fine. And I said, what about Biden? Yep, that's illegal too. Okay, we disagree. But at least you're consistent. Any help, trying to get help from a foreign country, dirt in your opponent is always illegal. Okay, what Trump did was illegal. Okay, what about Hillary? Sure, it's illegal. Okay, I disagree. I think neither are illegal. But if you think it's okay for one and not the other, then you might be hopelessly partisan. And you could arrogantly think, oh, the people that disagree with me are just trying to cover up for Trump, or That's not what's happening. And then people will try to apply this to me. They'll try to misapply it. So if you say that Biden's quid pro quo is worthy of investigating, then why not Trump's? Either quid pro quos are illegal or they're not. Well, they're not. I never said they were. It is clear that that's what the Democrats feel. It's clear that's what the media feels. Yeah, Kishki, it's 1:30. But I'll probably drop you an email here, probably tomorrow morning. When I'm done here, I'll probably head to bed. But it's ridiculous. It's either a crime. If you think all quid pro quos are crimes, that's fine. We have tons. But that's obviously not what I'm saying. That's obviously not what the Democrats or what the media think. If they did, they would say what Joe Biden did was a crime. This is where the Republicans, as I've said, go wrong. And it's clear that many of these Republicans don't like Trump all that much anyways, like Ben Shapiro. Because Ben Shapiro, when I talked about this, when this whole scandal broke, or coup attempt as I call it, Ben Shapiro said this. He's like, well, here's what you need to know. Here's what Joe Biden did. Joe Biden issued a quid pro quo. But it was to get this guy fired because they thought he was being corrupt. And then, if what Trump did was a quid pro quo, then that's it. It's impeachable. What Biden did, politics is messy, business is messy. That stuff happens all the time. But if Trump issued a quid pro quo, then it's impeachable. No, Shapiro. Why is Biden's quid pro quo acceptable, but Trump's isn't? It's not the quid pro quo. That's not the problem. Or bribery, or extortion, whatever you want to call it. The idea of withholding funds until you get a favor. That's clearly not the problem. Hardly anyone's saying that. They're saying it's a problem when Trump did it. But that's because they're saying the intent of what Trump did was wrong. Not the actual quid pro quo. We know that as a matter of foreign policy, quid pro quos are used just about every time we give foreign aid. We never just say, here's a bunch of money, screw it, do what you want. We're always like, here are the conditions put on this aid. That's a quid pro quo. You're saying, we will give you this in exchange for something. We'll give you this money if you use it to fight corruption. We'll give you this money if you give it to people starving to death. We'll give you this money if you use it to fight diseases that are spreading in your country. We'll give you this money if you use it to fight terrorism. We'll give you this money if you cooperate with us on this investigation going on, etc. That's done literally every time we give some sort of foreign aid. No one said it was illegal before. They're saying if you give a quid pro quo for illegitimate reasons, then it's a problem. So then it's not the quid pro quo that's the problem. So when this person says to me, either quid pro quos are illegal or they're not, and if you had a problem with Biden's, then that proves Trump's must have been illegal. No, because I'm not saying the quid pro, so you're a hypocrite. No, I'm not saying that. Listen, and this is the best example I could come up with. It is legal to hire contractors, correct? I could hire a contractor to do yard work. I could hire a contractor to bake a cake for a wedding or for some sort of party. No one would argue that's illegal. I cannot hire a contractor to murder someone. Would your defense be, you said hiring contractors was legal, therefore it must be legal to hire one to murder someone? No! That's not... You can't see the difference? I'm saying just because something's a quid pro quo it has no bearing on whether or not it's legal or illegal. They happen all the time. It's only illegal or unethical if your motivation is illegal or unethical. That's why the media and the Democrats don't have a problem with Biden's admitted quid pro quo, because they were assuming his motivation was pure. And the reason they have a problem with Trump's quid pro quo, which isn't one, but alleged quid pro quo, is they're assuming his motivations were evil or for personal reasons or to help win an election. My stance from the get-go has been, I don't know if Biden did anything illegal. But I know this. Anytime an executive branch member threatens to withhold congressionally approved tax dollars to a foreign country unless they fire a prosecutor who is looking into a company that employs that executive branch member's family, there should be an investigation. Period. End of story. That sounds complicated, right? That sounds like a complicated statement. Let me break it down real simple. You're the vice president or you're the president and you say, hey, I'm going to withhold a huge sum of tax dollars unless they fire the guy that's looking into my son's company. That warrants an investigation. Or my daughter's company, or my nephew's company, or the Secretary of State's brother's company. It doesn't matter. But Rob, what if everyone in the mainstream media said it was okay? It doesn't matter. But Rob, what if a bunch of leaders in the EU said it was okay? It doesn't matter. But Rob, what if Christine Lagarde at the IMF, who attended George Soros, said that that's what she would do? It doesn't matter. But Rob, what if they said that the reason they wanted that prosecutor fired was they weren't looking into that family member's company enough? It doesn't matter. There should be an investigation. Does that prove that what Biden did was wrong or unethical or guilty? No. But there should be an investigation. Now, why does that matter? If there should be an investigation, then what's the case to impeach Trump again? What did he do that was so wrong? If our president, whose job it is, what's the Constitution say is the executive branch's job? Like Civics 101. Legislative branch, that's Congress. What are they supposed to do? Write the law. Judicial branch, that's the courts. What are they supposed to do? Interpret the law. What's the executive branch supposed to do? Anyone remember? Enforce the law, right? The president is the chief officer of enforcing the law. If looking into see if the previous administration or high-powered people in this government misused $1 billion for personal reasons isn't a reason to investigate, that doesn't meet the threshold, then what does? Of course Trump has every reason to investigate it. Now, one of the tricks the media plays, and the Democrats play all the time, is they constantly will reveal things. They'll say, at the time, nothing's wrong, scandal-free, everything's great. It's a conspiracy. It's a vast right-wing conspiracy to criticize the Democrats or the media or the intel community right now. But they'll admit 10 years down the road, oh yeah, that was a problem. Just like the Iraq War. How dare you criticize going into the Iraq War? And then they admit afterwards, we really should have criticized more. Or Bill Clinton, when Juanita Broaddrick's credibly accusing him of rape. By the way, Bill Clinton should be given all of the due process and innocent until proven guilty as anyone else. But his victim had far more evidence than, say, Kavanaugh's. And the media didn't care. James Carville, who's one of the head Democratic strategists, said, that's what you get when you drag $20 through a trailer park. That's what he said about Juanita Broaddrick. Imagine if they'd have said that about Christine Blasey Ford. That was the Democrats and the media spin on the accused rape victim of Bill Clinton. That was their take then. Now they can admit later, once Bill Clinton's no longer relevant to them holding power, oh yes, we should have done more. It's every time like that. So now, when you read all the papers, right, go ahead and check it out. Read the defense that the media is giving of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Read the defense. This is how every single one starts. I promise you, this is how almost every single one does it. Because they realize they're trying to sound reasonable to people, right? Because they know objectively, even if you don't follow politics, if you hear this story, okay, so wait a minute. The vice president's in charge of ending corruption in this country. Yeah? And he says that this particular oligarch is guilty. He's a real corrupt guy. Yeah? Yeah. And then his son, at the same time, goes to work for that corrupt oligarch. Yeah. And his son has no experience in the field, or no experience with the country, but he's getting $3.5 million. Yeah. Now, the average person's going to be like, that sounds pretty bad. That sounds shady to me. Right? And one of the things you learn in debate, because I was a debater, but you don't have to be involved in the actual game of debate. You can intuitively figure this out. Most human beings, you are turned off and you're less likely to listen to someone who arrogantly thinks they're right about everything, right? So in the game of debate, the truth of the matter is, no matter how much better I would be than my opponent, I can't think of a single round where I was absolutely right about everything and my opponent was absolutely wrong about everything. The truth is, most really high-level debates, they all have 100 arguments going on, and maybe you're right about 51 and your opponent's right about 49. I mean, it's just the nature of it. At that level, people are pretty smart and they're practiced in their arguments, and so it becomes a matter of the strategy of the game becomes admitting, okay, we're losing this part, but we're winning this part, and then convincing your judge, this is why the part I'm winning is most important, right? It outweighs what they're talking about. What's the same here? The media understands that. The Democrats understand that, right? So what they're doing, and it's like, what the hell am I talking about? I get it. This is what the Democrats do. Read all of these reports and the media reports. This is what they'll say. They'll say, oh, clearly it was a bad decision to allow Hunter Biden to work there. And it had the appearance of a conflict of interest. That's what Kent said. That's what Taylor said. That's what Yovanovitch said. That's what Politico said. That's what the Washington Post said. That's what all of them say. Well, in hindsight, it was a really bad idea. That's funny. Did anybody speak up at the time? Did the New York Times speak up at the time? Or the Washington Post? Or Kent did, ironically. But basically now, retroactively, they could say, oh, we all knew it was the appearance of a conflict of interest should be avoided, and that was bad. But Biden didn't do anything wrong. Joe Biden didn't do anything wrong. So they make it sound reasonable because they know the average person is like, wait, no, this is bad. And so they have to sound reasonable. So they're like, oh, we agree. It looks really bad that Hunter Biden was there. But no crime by Joe. But let's investigate a little deeper there. What does that mean? Why is hypothetically, and I'm quoting, the appearance of a conflict of interest, why is that something to be avoided? Because everyone agrees that should be avoided. They might not say it's criminal, but they say we should seek to avoid that. What is it about, listen carefully, the appearance of a conflict of interest? One second. What's up, bud? What is it about the appearance of a conflict of interest that is so bad? Well, the idea is a conflict of interest means that your official job that you're being paid for might run into being antithetical to something that affects you in your personal life. So let's give the easy example I can think of the conflict of interest is, remember the famous Black Sox? Right? When was it? Like 19 teens. You basically had the conflict of interest was you had a bunch of guys playing in the World Series, but they also were working with the mob and getting a bunch of money if they lost. So their job in attempting to win a baseball game was conflicted with them trying to make more money by throwing the game. This stuff could happen all the time. It's why you wouldn't allow a judge to sit in a court case of their spouse or their child. Wouldn't happen. They would recuse themselves. Because the conflict of interest would be, on one hand, the judge, his job is to be impartial, but on the other hand, their personal life is they have a vested interest in the outcome of the case. So you want to seek to avoid even the appearance, is the idea. That's why people recuse themselves. Because if you don't recuse on even the appearance, then what could happen is you could actually get to a situation where the conflict of interest manifests itself. Now, I can't think of a clearer example than you're the point man for ending corruption in a country, and your son is being investigated, your son's company is being investigated for working for one of the very oligarchs that you've called corrupt. That's bad enough. But then to take it a step further, and you actually get involved by forcing the firing of the prosecutor who, at least on paper, was tasked with investigating your son's company. Now, if the New York Times and George Kent and the Washington Post and Yovanovitch and Taylor and the Democrats and CNN and MSNBC, if they could all admit that it was bad for Hunter Biden to get that job because it had the appearance of a conflict of interest, then why all of a sudden is it not, all of a sudden it's not a problem that Joe Biden forced the firing of the prosecutor looking into his son's company? They admit that it had the appearance of a conflict of interest, but how dare we question if it actually was a conflict of interest? That's what they're saying. That's insane. But that's what they want us to believe. Right. I mean, the idea of oh, well, it just appears bad. What is the appearance? What does that mean? What's another word of saying that? An appearance. That means that's a type of evidence. An appearance of a conflict of interest is there is evidence of a potential conflict of interest. Right? That's another way of saying that. Well, if we have evidence of a potential conflict of interest, and the executive branch is seeking to make sure that there aren't conflicts of interest being involved with huge sums of U.S. tax dollars, then why shouldn't there be an investigation? And no one can answer. They just say, well, it's been debunked. But wait a minute. You, in the same article you say it's been debunked, you admit there's an appearance of a conflict of interest. So can you show me the investigation that's been done, even by the media? One, could you show me the investigation been done by any U.S. law enforcement agency? But second, can you show me an investigation done by the media that have cleared, that have proven that this conflict of interest didn't manifest? Because you admit there's an appearance. So where's the investigation that proved that the appearance wasn't as it seemed? They have none. They just say, well, the IMF thought Shoka could be fired. Irrelevant. That doesn't prove there can't be a conflict of interest. If I'm the district attorney for my county, and my brother's being charged with the crime, and everybody says, well, the assistant DA that's prosecuting Rob's brother is corrupt. He shouldn't be there. So I fire that assistant district attorney. Do you think that there wouldn't be an investigation? Like, wait a minute. The DA fired the assistant DA that was looking into his brother? Do you think it would be acceptable for me to say, hey man, everybody thought that guy sucked, but you didn't fire him until he was looking at your brother? Well, and again, I don't know how many times I have to say this. You could tell me, you could pretend you know what's in Joe Biden's heart all you want. You could tell me that everybody in the EU and everybody at the IMF and everybody in the media all thought that he was right to want this prosecutor fired because he was corrupt. You don't know why Joe Biden did it. Even if that prosecutor was corrupt, you don't know if the fact that he, at least on paper, was looking into Joe Biden's son's company didn't factor into it. There should be an investigation. If it was Trump forcing the firing of a prosecutor looking into Don Jr.'s company, and Trump withheld $1 billion of aid to a country until that prosecutor was fired, you'd be screaming. But here's the facts that we do know. Regardless of what you know in your heart, Biden knows in his heart. Regardless of that, Cuomo and Jake Tapper and Anderson Cooper and Rachel Maddow and Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff, right? Regardless of what you know that Biden knew in his heart, right? Here's what we do know. We were told by Obama and Biden that this guy was corrupt. Zlochevsky. We know that Hunter Biden went to work for him. We know Hunter Biden got huge sums of money with no expertise whatsoever. We know that Joe Biden said the prosecutor looking into Zlochevsky is the problem that he's not being looked into. His name's Viktor Shokin. And so we know, based on his own words, he extorted the Ukraine to fire Shokin. We know that then the case went to the NABU, which was allied with Biden and Obama. And we know the end result was Zlochevsky walks free today. Burisma was never charged. They didn't have to give back the millions of dollars. They had to pay a small tax fine, and that was it. That's what we know. Now, if we have a police department in a city and it's accused of corruption, and we have a guy then from Internal Affairs that's looking into that police department, and the mayor fires that Internal Affairs person because they say they're corrupt, and then a new one comes in and they allow the alleged corrupts to walk free, people are going to scream nepotism. People are going to scream conflict of interest. Wait a minute, so there was a guy investigating corruption. They fired him, and the new guy that got brought in promptly let everyone walk free? That doesn't sound right. If Joe Biden or Barack Obama or the IMF or the EU or Anderson Cooper or Adam Schiff or Nancy Pelosi or George Soros or the Atlantic Council, all the people that knew that the prosecutor Victor Shokin was corrupt, all the people that knew Zlochevsky, the guy running Burisma, Hunter Biden's son's company, was corrupt, if all of them knew that the reason Zlochevsky wasn't going down was because this prosecutor, Victor Shokin, and if they just got him out of the way, finally justice could be done. And then they got their wish. Shokin got out of the way. And they got their wish. Their allies at the NABU got the investigation. Surely that's it then. Now Zlochevsky's going down. Nope, they promptly bury the case. Why didn't Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Adam Schiff and Anderson Cooper and Rachel Maddow and everybody at the IMF and everybody at the EU, why didn't one person speak up and say, wait, what? Didn't the U.S. threaten to withhold $1 billion because they claimed that the entire corruption in the Ukraine was this one prosecutor? They got rid of him, and corruption still exists. If Joe Biden and Barack Obama had came out and said, holy cow, okay, press conference time. Now, we only agreed to give them this $1 billion in loan because it was on the condition of ending corruption. And we thought, because we know Zlochevsky's corrupt and we know Burisma's corrupt, so we thought if we get rid of this guy, Victor Shokin, then finally they'll start investigating these corrupt oligarchs. So they got rid of Shokin and we thought that was it. So we gave the $1 billion, and then it turns out that wasn't it. And it turns out that the people we thought were good people at the NABU, they're not. They're corrupt. We know they're corrupt because they allowed the corrupt Zlochevsky to walk free. And so now we're asking the Trump administration, don't give this country any more aid until they get rid of all the people at the NABU because they're corrupt. Had they said that, then all of a sudden their story of, oh, they did this just to end corruption. That's what withholding the $1 billion was. It was just to end corruption. Then it would make more sense. But instead we're told, no, Joe Biden and Obama did this to end corruption. And they thought this Zlochevsky guy was corrupt. And so when they got rid of the prosecutor, they know Zlochevsky would be prosecuted, but he wasn't prosecuted, and they just don't care anymore. Now remember, this is something I said on my last video. They keep asking, the Democrats keep harping on all these witnesses. Would you say that it was almost unprecedented for a president to ask another country to investigate his political rival? Oh, yes, that's very unprecedented. Taylor said that. That's very troubling. It's very troubling. But Trump's acting in response to an unprecedented action. And here's a challenge. Anyone who thinks that's against Trump and all this, thinks he should be impeached. Can you name me one time in the history of this country, the aid has been conditioned on the firing of a prosecutor who was looking into an executive branch member's family's company? One time. Can you name me any time in history that's happened? I'll go a step further. Can you name me one time in history the aid has been conditioned on just firing a single prosecutor? Let alone one who's looking into someone connected to the executive branch's family? Leave that part out. One time that's ever in recorded history of the United States where the executive branch said, we will give you this aid if you fire this prosecutor. Just one time. I can't. I've asked this question to people upset about Trump's unprecedented actions. They haven't been able to give me that. So what Taylor and Kent and Yovanovitch and all the Democrats and Fiona Hill and Vindman, all the witnesses, what they want you to focus on is what Trump did was unprecedented. But they want you to totally ignore Trump was responding to an unprecedented situation. What came first? Trump's asked to investigate Biden, which they're calling unprecedented, or the fact what Biden himself did was unprecedented? But they don't care about that. They ignore that what Biden did was unprecedented. He had a prosecutor fired that was looking into his son's company. It doesn't get more clear-cut. I don't care. If we can't as a country agree, that's reason for an investigation. Does that prove Joe Biden's guilty? No. Does it prove that Hunter Biden's guilty? Absolutely not. But there's reason for an investigation. And the Democrats know it. They've said, yes, there was an appearance of a conflict of interest. Okay, then there's a good reason to look into that appearance. Especially when 1 billion U.S. tax dollars were up for grabs. We damn sure better be certain in investigating when 1 billion U.S. tax dollars are on the line. Any appearance of impropriety should be investigated when the stakes are that high. And they're hypocrites more, all these witnesses. They say, well, Trump threatening to withhold that aid. Ukrainians died. They died because he held up that aid for 50. Even the threat of withholding the aid, the perception was terrible, and the Russians knew that they could come in, and it was just terrible, and these Ukrainians died. Okay, how about when the Obama and Biden administration threatened to withhold aid? Did it do the same thing? How about when Joe Biden bragged about it to the CFR? That do the same thing? Or how about this? When a, quote, whistleblower forced the president to release a transcript of a private conversation he had with a foreign leader. Did that damage our diplomacy? None of that matters. None of that matters to these supposed experts in the State Department. Nope, don't care about that. But these are the experts. These are the people. Where are the Republicans? Why am I doing their job better? They're getting a salary. Their job, if you're a Republican on the Intel Committee, your job's focusing on this 24/7. You know how I know that? Because nothing's getting done in the House because the Democrats control the House. And all they're focused on is impeachment. So the only thing you could be doing is arguing against this coup attempt. Yet you're less competent than me, some fat guy sitting on a chair that doesn't even make $15 an hour, that's working 78 hours a week. What is my incentive to vote for this party again? You know, and I'll end on this. I ran as a Republican. I try to work with the Republicans in my area. I'm told by Republicans in my area that I kind of got to follow the chain of command. I can't just primary someone. I can't just go off and do my own thing. I need to work as a group. You know what I'm told? I got to hand out yard signs. That's what I should be doing. Now, I don't care. I don't need to be in the limelight. I don't care at all. I have a great life, by the way. I love my life. Love my family. Love my friends. I like my job. But when I'm more passionate and have a better ability to defend against this coup than the people I'm voting for whose job it is to do just that, what's my incentive to keep supporting them? I live in rural Pennsylvania. What are my congressmen doing? They signed a petition saying that Schiff should have to release his witness testimonies. Okay. That's it? I call them. I send them emails. I say, what can I do? No response, no response, no response. The Republicans think That they could just go along to get along. They don't want to do anything, because here's the dirty little secret, right? Most politicians, when you get right down to it, you know what they want more than anything? To keep their job. And so they're trying to make a calculation. What can I do to keep my job? What can I do? How can I play this? I don't want to go out on a limb. And so this is what we get. Just news, Lindsey Graham out there on TV every night. We're going to get to the bottom of this. This is a coup attempt. We're no on impeachment. I'm not even going to listen to the witnesses. What are you doing, Lindsey Graham? What are any of the Republicans do? Yes, there are good ones. What's her name? Stefanik, I think is how you pronounce it. She did good. Jim Jordan, Ratcliffe. They're okay, but they're still not making the best arguments. And I'm so tired of these appeals to authority. Well, if what you're saying is true, if George can't really testify to that, then why didn't the Republicans bring it up? I don't know. I don't appeal to authority like that. Because they're incompetent? Because they're waiting to bring it up at a later point? I don't know or care. I'm sick and tired of the gamesmanship. The truth is what matters. Not because it's my side or anything like that. Because it's corrupt. So. Alright, everyone. Probably about time for me to hit the sack. Kishki, I'll definitely email you in the future here. Hopefully I get to it tomorrow. I'll be a little busy. But I'm going to try to do late night streams like this more often. It'll be predominantly on Mondays and Tuesdays. Tomorrow I will not be live streaming during the witness testimony, but I'll be trying to follow along. Maybe on Above Top Secret, giving my thoughts on it at the time. I mean, all I could ask from you all is thank you again. I really appreciate it. I don't have a Patreon account. I'm not asking for money. But if you haven't, if you could please like and subscribe. If you could retweet or whatever platforms you're on, if you could share, particularly my non-live stream videos, because I know not a lot of people are going to watch a 3-hour live stream video. So, share the last video I did on what I think is the biggest news story in the country today that I've heard me and John Solomon talk about, which is the same witnesses, the State Department has admitted that they forced Ukraine to shut down an investigation into election interference that helped Hillary. They admitted that. That's a bombshell. That word gets tossed around. That's huge. So, tomorrow I might put a video out on the testimony, the letter that Senator Ron Johnson sent to Jim Jordan, which proves that he was specifically told by Trump that there was no quid pro quo, that the withholding of aid was only about two things. It was about, one, him being PO'd, that no one in Europe gave aid, and he thought they should step up to the plate, and second, that he was worried that Ukraine was still corrupt. That's what Senator Johnson said. He spoke directly to the president, and he told Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation exactly that. So maybe we'll talk about that more tomorrow. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good one.